Chapter 1526. Now's the time, Luo Fan shouted softly. Following his shout, Hanguzi and the others moved. In an instant, thousands of false saints appeared in front of everyone. However, these pseudo-saints were completely lifeless. Each of them was like a statue, quietly floating in the void. On the surface of these false saints' bodies, there was the aura of true saints that existed in an extremely strange way, completely sealing the bodies of the false saints. In fact, it was the aura of these true sages that made them unable to move even though they were still false sages at this moment. Moreover, it was also because of the existence of these true saints' auras that the false saints' status did not collapse after leaving the world they were born in. They still maintained that eternal and indestructible characteristic. This method of using the aura of true saints to surround and seal them to prevent their status from collapsing was also an extremely magical method. However, it could not be used by ordinary false saints to break through the shackles of heaven and earth and maintain their status as false saints in the various worlds. There was no other reason. This method had to first make the false saint half dead and exhaust his mind, which was to make him close to a state of fake death, to be effective. Moreover, once he was sealed by the aura of a true saint, the false saint would completely lose all perception of the outside world and would never wake up. How could such an outcome be used as a basis for a false saint to break through the shackles of heaven and earth? After sending these false saints out from their respective places of preservation, the power of the false saints under the true saints began to fluctuate rapidly. Countless mysterious and wondrous powers began to weave and construct in the void. Gradually, the outline of a huge altar was formed. This altar was extremely vast. Even the foaming realm seemed insignificant compared to this altar, not to mention the false saints like Luo Fan and the others. As the power of the many false saints surged, the altar continued to be completed. Many details were continuously opened up and became more and more abundant. Vaguely, there were traces of true sage aura being continuously injected into the altar, causing the altar to gradually give birth to an indescribable light. This light, it was similar to the layers of treasure lights that erupted during the battle between the true sages. However, it didn't have the super-penetrating power of the treasure light. All of the light only flowed around inside and outside the altar. During the entire process, the altar seemed to be constantly being cleansed and refined by the light. That sense of authenticity became more and more obvious and intense. The entire construction process of the altar developed extremely quickly.
In just an hour, the entire incomparably huge altar that seemed to exist had already appeared in front of the many pseudo-sages. This was an altar that seemed to be completely constructed from some unknown material. It appeared to be extremely simple and mysterious. The entire altar was filled with all sorts of lines that seemed rather chaotic, but were actually filled with endless mysteries. These lines, at this moment, it was as if it had been activated. Every single line began to move towards every corner of the altar, swim to every point. Such a change made the altar seem to be constantly changing, as if its essence was constantly changing. Seeing this, Luo Fan pinched it without hesitation and said, "Withdraw." As he spoke, he directly drew out the aura of the net of karma. The aura of the net of karma was also the aura of a true sage. Moreover, as the net of karma itself was stronger than any of the true sage mystical abilities that many pseudo-sages could perform, this true sage aura was also above all the true sage auras that had appeared here previously. At this moment, Luo Fan, who was wrapped in this aura, looked like a supreme, truly eternal, indestructible, omniscient, omnipotent, and even the chaotic state could not be shaken. Even if the entire earth was destroyed, it would not be able to affect him in any way. This brought an extremely great shock to the many pseudo-sages present and the many pseudo-sages who were watching everything from not far away. At this moment, they finally truly felt how powerful Luo Fan was. They truly understood how huge the gap between them and Luo Fan was. However, Luo Fan did not care about them. At this moment, he was focusing all his attention on the altar in front of him. He was very upset. The true sage aura contained in the net of karma that he had triggered directly enveloped the entire void where the altar was located. Because this true divine aura was too strong, it had already materialized into reality. It directly constructed an infinite amount of karma in the void. Faintly, it seemed as though billions of worlds had been strung together to construct the karma in front of him. The constructed karma had the characteristics of true karma. It seemed to be connected to everything in the universe, but it also seemed to be above everything. Vaguely, it also had some inexplicable connection with the mysterious long river of luck that was located somewhere. After the appearance of the endless karma, the long river of luck that was originally hidden in an unknown place actually began to project itself. It vaguely appeared in the void, above the altar, and above everyone. With Luo Fan's command, all the karma began to shrink rapidly. This shrinkage brought along everything within it, including the altar and even the dark underworld. It also included the great path fragments that were crazily surging into the dark underworld. Almost in the blink of an eye, the karma had already shrunk to an unknown number of billionths of its original size. Along with it, the altar had actually shrunk from its original vast size to only a radius of 100,000 feet. At the same time, the dark underworld had also shrunk to a size similar to the altar, which was also 100,000 feet in size. Although the shrinkage of the altar was extremely short, there was still a process after all. At this moment, the dark underworld seemed to have used this pressure to completely absorb the surrounding great path fragments into the dark underworld, causing no great path fragments to exist in the dark underworld. Since it had shrunk to this extent, the reality of the altar was already tens of thousands of times stronger than before. At this moment, the entire altar, it already seemed to be the most real existence in the universe. Even a false saint, compared to this altar, it seemed to be a little illusory. Seeing this, Luo Fan retracted his hand. In an instant, the true saint aura that he had triggered previously, the true saint aura that belonged to the net of karma, was instantly retracted by him, disappearing into nothingness. The disappearance of the true saint aura was due to the karma formed by the true saint aura. It was due to the projection of the long river of luck summoned by the karma. Naturally, it also naturally disappeared into nothingness. In the blink of an eye, only the altar with a radius of 100,000 feet, thousands of false saints, and the strange dark underworld of the ruins were left in front of everyone. Although the altar had become so small because of the suppression of the aura. However, once it was formed, it was naturally completely fixed. Now, even if it was no longer suppressed by the true saint aura, the altar did not increase in size, nor did it return to its original appearance. Instead, it maintained its current appearance. The kind of truth that was revealed from it was even more unabated. Seeing that the altar had taken shape, Luo Fan slowly retracted his hand and said to everyone, "The next thing is up to everyone." It's all up to everyone. He had now completed the most important step of this altar and had even built the underworld that was the foundation of the world. He had already completed the most important part of opening up the world. Although there were still many complicated things to be done to make the world truly take shape, the effect of those things added up could no longer be compared to what Luo Fan had done previously. Under such circumstances, it was obvious that the contributions he had made for the creation of the world were enough for him to obtain authority that surpassed many false saints. This was already the bottom line of the many false saints. If he still wanted to continue, not to mention the fact that it would be strenuous and unrewarding, even the other false saints would probably not be willing to sit back and watch him continue. Due to this consideration, Luo Fan stopped at this moment. Hearing this, Hun Guzi and the others were not surprised. They just nodded and began to move. They each sent the false saints they had sealed onto the altar and arranged them into an inexplicable formation in an extremely special and mysterious way. They slowly revolved around the altar and faintly emitted some kind of inexplicable power that surged into the underworld, causing the great Tao fragments in the underworld to gradually undergo some kind of subtle change. When the formation was formed and the disease began to operate perfectly, they began the second step. All kinds of mysterious power began to slowly pour into the altar, causing the endless and densely packed lines on the altar to undergo some kind of extremely subtle change. During this subtle change, the altar faintly communicated with the chaotic state outside the world and slowly guided the mysterious power of the chaotic state down, causing everything on the altar to be enveloped by this power. It's indeed similar to the power of the great tribulation of the world. Luo Fan thought as he looked at the changes on the altar. When he was studying the structure of the altar, he had already guessed the effect of the altar. He vaguely guessed that the altar might have used some kind of extremely subtle method to trigger the power of the great tribulation of the world. From there, it used this relatively stable and safer great tribulation of the world to refine and fuse the countless great Tao fragments. In the end, the great Tao fragments would fuse into one and become a truly complete great Tao that far surpassed all the great Tao that could give birth to a false saint. Then, it would refine the world derived from the great Tao, causing the world to become truly stable and take shape. However, that was only research after all. Without seeing it for himself, how could he be sure that it was really that kind of power? Only now, when he saw the power of the altar, did he confirm this point. What a wonderful altar, as expected of the inheritance of a true saint. Luo Fan sighed to himself. Normally, only a true saint could easily control the chaotic state and guide the specific power of the chaotic state. However, at this moment, they had already achieved this with the help of this strange altar and the thousands of false saints as sacrifices. How could he not be emotional? At this moment, the thousands of false saints that were revolving according to a mysterious formation became more and more blurry as the mysterious power descended. The blurry appearance of these false saints was not because their speed had increased and exceeded the limits of human vision. Instead, it was as if their essence was gradually extracted by some unknown existence. That was why they gradually became blurry. When the appearance of these false saints completely disappeared, it meant that these false saints had been completely sacrificed. They would completely disappear from the universe and die. This point, it also proved that the altar was sacrificing them to the chaotic state. It proved that the power triggered by the altar came from the chaotic state. There was no other reason. Apart from a true saint, only the chaotic state could destroy a false saint. The entire sacrificial process was not fast. The power that was triggered from the chaotic state, which was similar to the great tribulation of the world, was constantly acting on it like a hammer. He constantly tempered the endless fragments of the great path in the unseen world, causing the fragments of the great path, which were originally unpredictable and tumbling like clouds, to fuse together more and more during this tempering. As the huge cloud became smaller and smaller, the number of fragments in it also became fewer and fewer. In fact, the connection between it and the great tribulation of the world became closer and closer. At this moment, Hun Guzi and the others were constantly channeling their power into the altar. Their bodies were even trembling slightly because of this infusion. With one look, one could tell how huge the consumption was. On the other hand, Luo Fan acted as if nothing had happened. He just quietly comprehended how the mysterious power brought by the altar had an effect on the great Tao fragments. How it had an effect on the great Tao fragments. The power triggered by the altar was only an insignificant trace of power compared to the true great tribulation of the world. However, it had already included the essence of the great tribulation of the world. If he could comprehend something through this trace of power, it would naturally be easier for him to deal with the great tribulation of the world. The benefits of surviving the great tribulation of the world would also be pushed to the limit. Luo Fan was naturally very clear about this. Of course, he could not let go of such a rare opportunity. This sacrificial process lasted for 3 whole months. After 3 months, when all the great Tao fragments on the altar had finally fused and turned into an unprecedentedly vast great Tao, the thousands of false saints on the altar finally flashed their last shadows and disappeared in front of everyone in the blink of an eye. Just as the last shadow of the false sages disappeared, all the false sages suddenly woke up from their completely sealed state. For a moment, endless complicated emotions flashed in their eyes. Almost every false saint seemed to want to say something. However, it was a pity that the reason why they could wake up was only the last radiance of a setting sun. They did not even have the time to speak before they were completely sacrificed to the chaotic state by the altar and disappeared from the altar. Their last words, however, could not be heard by anyone else. After sacrificing all the false saints, the altar itself began to tremble slightly. Vaguely, endless cracks appeared on the altar. These cracks were extremely small at first, but in the blink of an eye, they had already expanded to the point that the entire altar looked like it was formed by countless tiny fragments. Immediately after, the entire altar did not even collapse. It was like smoke blown away by the wind, gradually disappearing in front of everyone. At this moment, the altar began to tremble violently. The entire altar began to expand and grow crazily. This kind of expansion and growth was unprecedentedly domineering. In the blink of an eye, it had already expanded 1,000,000 times. In the blink of an eye, it expanded another 1,000,000 times, just like that. In just a few short breaths, the netherworld that was originally 100,000 feet tall had already expanded to a boundless scale. In fact, even Luo Fan and the others were instantly swallowed into the unseen world and appeared above the great path that had already taken shape. This was a great Tao. It was unprecedentedly vast among all the false saints present. Wisps of mysterious aura emanated from it, and there was a faint hint of the aura of a true saint. As for the mysterious aura of a false saint, it was so dense that it seemed to be unable to dissipate. This was the great Tao formed by the condensation of more than 1,200 great Taos that could give birth to false saints. When they truly felt the changes in this great Tao, all the false saints present, including Luo Fan, their expressions changed slightly. There's actually the mystery of a true saint in it. It seems that there's indeed a possibility of becoming a true saint by proving one's Tao and becoming a saint in this world. This was naturally what Hun Guzi and the others were thinking. One must know that if they wanted to turn the fake into the real, they wanted to turn their false saint godhood into a true saint godhood that was not shackled by anything. In order to achieve this, the mystery of a true saint was necessary. They definitely had to go. Hence, the great Tao in front of them actually contained the mystery of a true saint. To them, it clearly meant that there was a possibility of allowing a false saint to become a true saint. When Luo Fan saw these true saint mysteries, he was not only surprised, but he also had a headache. The reason was that there were simply too few true saint mysteries. It was so few that it might not even be enough for the 10 false saints to rely on this mystery to prove their Tao and become saints. There were countless ways to prove one's Tao and become a false saint in a certain world, but the final result of any method was extremely closely related to the great Tao of that world. In other words, there were all sorts of strange things. In the end, the mysterious and peerless method of proving one's Tao had to be traced back to the various mysteries of the great Tao. It was also because of this. That was why false saints could only be born in the world that had the mystery of a false saint in the great Tao. There were countless false saint mysteries in this world. Just by looking at it, it was probably enough to support tens of thousands of cultivators to successfully prove their Tao and become false saints. However, the true sage-level mysteries in this great Tao were many times less than the false sage-level mysteries. Although Luo Fan was not like Hun Guzi and the rest, he clearly knew what they were thinking. Those who relied on the mystery of a false saint to prove their Tao and become saints were false saints. Then, those who relied on the mystery of a true saint to prove their Tao and become saints. Of course, those who succeeded would become true saints. With this thought, they would naturally regard these true saint mysteries as something that they could rely on to turn the fake into the real. There were more than 40 false saints here, but the true saint mysteries here could only allow less than 10 false saints to prove their Tao and become saints. This kind of contradiction would obviously break the originally harmonious atmosphere between these false saints. The battle between these pseudo-saints was probably about to begin now. Sure enough, at this moment, Hunguzi and the rest quickly weighed the true saint mysteries contained in the Great Tao. For a moment, everyone's expression changed, and they became inexplicably wary of the other true saint disciples who they had been working with happily. If it wasn't for the fact that it wasn't that easy to prove one's Tao and become a saint, and that they couldn't snatch the true saint mysteries like items and put them away directly, there might have been a tragic battle between them. In the face of turning the fake into the real and becoming a true saint, everything was fake. Of course, they were only wary of the other true saint disciples. However, they were already hostile to Luo Fan. At this very moment, almost half of their attention was placed on Luo Fan, while the other half of their attention was diverted to the other 40 false saints under the true saints. After all, not only was Luo Fan the strongest among all the false saints present, but he had also obtained authority that far exceeded theirs in this world. Luo Fan was naturally able to sense it, but he smiled bitterly in his heart at this moment. Proving one's Tao and becoming a saint with the true saint mysteries makes one a true saint? How could there be such a simple thing in this world? If that's the case, why would there be a need to painstakingly build this world in the various worlds? Wouldn't it be enough to directly prove one's Tao and become a saint in the Earth universe? Compared to here, the great Tao in the Earth universe is full of true saint mysteries. However, he obviously couldn't tell this to the others, and they definitely wouldn't believe it. Chapter 15:27. Of course, although the atmosphere between everyone had completely changed, this obviously could not stop the evolution of the great Tao in front of them. Very soon, all sorts of incredible changes appeared on the great Tao. Amidst these indescribable changes, a layer of nothingness was gradually born outside the unseen world. Then it was the law layer. Then it was time, space, matter, energy. A world that was becoming more and more perfect gradually took shape as the great Tao changed. Due to the strength of the great Tao itself, everything that was evolved through the great Tao, even the empty void layer, was countless times vaster than other worlds. Needless to say, there was no need to mention the layer of laws and laws. Compared to those worlds that could give birth to false saints, the complexity of the layer of laws and laws derived from the great Tao had already far surpassed them. As for the normal space-time layer, although it had just been born and its outline had just been constructed, it was already enough to show that it could be compared to countless worlds that could give birth to false saints. These various changes contained all sorts of mysteries contained in the great Tao. To the many false saints present, it was a good opportunity to comprehend the mysteries of the great Tao and the true saint mysteries contained within it. Therefore, at this moment, all the false saints had solemn expressions on their faces as they focused all their attention on the birth of this world. They did not care about anything else, including their previous hostility towards Luo Fan. At this moment, it had become secondary. Luo Fan looked at the evolution of the world in front of him and compared it with the world that he had opened up in the gap between the world and the state of chaos. He vaguely had a deeper understanding of the mysteries of this world. In fact, he felt as if he had some new ideas about the evolution of that world. The evolution of the world was actually a process of time construction. Before the entire world completely stabilized, the time in this world was a meaningless concept. To the many false saints, the only time they could feel was the flow of time in their own bodies. In other words, once they had the intention to change, the entire evolution process of the world might even extend to hundreds of millions of years, or it could be shortened to an instant. Everything depended on the intentions of these fake sages. At this moment, other than Luo Fan, all the false saints accelerated the flow of time in unison. It made him feel as if the time in this world had been stretched to an extreme degree. Obviously, the competition had already begun. Looking at the appearance of these false saints, they even had the thought of proving their Tao and becoming saints in this world when the construction of this world was completed, becoming the false saints of this world again. Compared to the other false saints who were not calm, Luo Fan seemed rather relaxed. However, he did not lengthen the flow of time. Instead, he matched the flow of time of the entire Earth's universe and observed the evolution of the world in front of him from the perspective of the normal time of the Earth's universe. After all, he did not have the intention to become a false saint in this world. Even if he were to rely on the true sage-level mysteries of this world to become a false sage, even then, he would only be a slightly stronger false sage. It was impossible for him to transform into a true sage. This way, even if he really used this method to become a false sage, he would not be able to do so. In the face of the super web of karma that he had preserved, it still had no ability to resist. In other words, in terms of overall strength, there was not much growth. Since that was the case, why should he waste time to do again? However, he was now focusing all his attention on the evolution process of this world, quietly comprehending the various essence mysteries that belong to the construction of this world. From his perspective, only a few dozen breaths had passed. The entire world had been completely constructed. The space-time layer, the nomological layer, the void layer, even the unseen world, had completely stabilized, forming an incomparably complete and stable whole. After the world had completely stabilized, Luo Fan instantly saw the appearance of this world with the great force that he had used to construct this world. The vastness of this world was something that Luo Fan had never seen before in his life. In fact, even the great Tianyuan world in his memory seemed to be far inferior to the world in front of him in terms of vastness. In this world, the density of the world's essence energy was so dense that it was almost solid. Grains of essence energy were spread out between heaven and earth, making the entire world seem to be completely solidified by the world's essence energy. In addition, the stability of the time and space of this world was far stronger than the world that could give birth to a false sage. It was even stronger than the earth, which was a perfect world. The complexity of the nomological layer had almost exceeded the limit of Luo Fan's imagination. There were all kinds of incredibly complicated principles that even Luo Fan could not help but be secretly shocked after seeing them. Not to mention the others. In the endless nomological laws, Luo Fan could even vaguely see traces of nomological laws that seemed to be related to a true sage. It was really because of these subtle connections that this world did not need a true sage to transform it. It already had the characteristics of a world that had been transformed by a true sage. Of course, it was not the kind of characteristic where the victor could leave while the loser had to stay in the world. Instead, it was the kind of characteristic that could prevent the true sage's theurgy from mixing together to form a vicious cycle that would eventually destroy the world. When he discovered this characteristic, Luo Fan was shocked, but at the same time, he smiled bitterly to himself. This world did not need a true sage's transformation to have such a characteristic. This was naturally beyond his expectations. It was something that he had never thought of before. However, it was precisely because of this characteristic. It could be predicted that the battle between the false sages under the true sage's tutelage would become even more unbridled. In the following period of time, this world would definitely be filled with divine theurgy. Divine abilities would definitely run amok. An entire world would have an extremely long period of chaos. At this moment, the 40-odd false sages who were attentively comprehending the specific process of the birth of this world gradually woke up. Although in Luo Fan's opinion, it was only a few dozen breaths. However, to them, it had been hundreds of millions of years since the birth of this world. At this moment, everyone's familiarity with this world had already surpassed Luo fans by many times. Furthermore, other than that, although each of them still maintained the false sage status, it was above this. However, there seemed to be a false saint that was not even a false saint, but was already above them, that was suppressing their false saint status. This wasn't the status of a false sage. It exuded an extremely strong and eternal aura, an aura that could not be worn down by thousands of tribulations. Faintly, there was even a hint of the aura of a true sage. When Luo Fan saw their appearances, he knew that these false sages had already used their own methods to find a way to become a sage with the help of the mysteries of the true sage level. In fact, they had all reached the final juncture and were only one step away from becoming a false sage. However, because everyone had chosen the mysteries of the true sage level, their statuses conflicted with each other. No one was able to truly merge the mysteries of the true saint level, so no one was able to break through the last barrier and truly become a saint in this world. And this, obviously, it also meant that the conflict between them had reached an irreconcilable point. Originally, these false sages were only wary of each other. Their hostility was placed on the most powerful Luo Fan. However, after this long period of time, their hostility towards Luo Fan had unknowingly dissipated. On the contrary, their hostility towards the other false sages, they had reappeared. There was no other reason. Luo Fan did not use the mysteries of the true sage level to prove his Tao and become a sage. To them, there was no intrinsic conflict. The moment the world completely stabilized, an irresistible force suddenly emitted from the great Tao of heaven and earth. It directly swept through all the false sages in the unseen world, including Luo Fan. This kind of power was vast and boundless. It felt as if a true sage-level existence had attacked. However, even a powerful existence like Luo Fan could not resist it in time. He was pushed out of the unseen world by this terrifying force and directly arrived at the void of this world. After arriving at this step, the layer of laws and laws suddenly produced a pulling force that was not the slightest bit weaker than the pushing force produced by the Great Tao. It directly pulled them into the layer of laws and laws, then broke through the layers of laws and laws, and finally entered the normal space-time layer. It was as if the world was rejecting all of them from leaving the normal space-time layer and was not willing to open the unseen world to them. Even on being rejected here, Luo Fan felt helpless. He was the creator of the unseen world. Now, the Great Tao had even expelled him from the unseen world. Even the layer of laws was not willing to let him stay. This was simply burning the bridge after crossing it. However, this sort of change was sufficient to show exactly how mysterious and profound this world was. Normal worlds, even those that could give birth to false sages, were like back gardens to false sages. They could go and leave as they pleased. Now that this world could even reject them, and even they could not enter the unseen world, one could imagine how powerful the power and might of this world was. At this moment, space-time fluctuated slightly. When he discovered this fluctuation, Luo Fan frowned slightly. The stability of this world and the stability of space had reached an unbelievable level. It was impossible to shake such space-time to this extent without the means of a false sage. In fact, it was a little difficult for it not to be a false sage. Therefore, it was obvious that there was a false sage entering this world. Could it be that someone is here to pick the fruit? He thought to himself as he looked in the direction of the source of the vibration. He discovered that in that space-time, there were dozens of pseudo-sages materializing from illusions. These figures, Luo Fan was extremely familiar with them. They were the false sages under the true sages who could not leave the other battlefield. So it's them. Seeing their appearances, Luo Fan came to a realization. He understood what was going on. It was obvious that the world that was used as a battlefield could not imprison the defeated false saints who did not participate in the battle forever. If they were really imprisoned, it would not be a battlefield, but a prison. Therefore, the world would definitely lose the ability to restrict the entry and exit of the false saints at some point. In terms of the purpose of the existence of this battlefield, when the outcome of this battle was finally revealed and there was no need to worry about any damage. Obviously, it was time for them to be able to escape freely. In other words, it was time for this world to be completely formed. What a wonderful world! He sighed. A sigh came from Jing Yitzi, who had just stepped into this world. At this moment, Jing Yitzi was smiling as he looked at the vast, barren land that had been frozen by Yuan Shi. Although the other pseudo-saints did not exclaim in admiration like Jing Yitzi. However, there was also joy on his face. Clearly, he was also very satisfied with this world. It's a pity that you're a step too late. You've already lost your chance, Luo Fan said with a smile. Jing Yitzi and the others heard the voice, causing them to be slightly stunned. Subsequently, they saw the current situation clearly, and they saw Hun Guzi and the others who didn't even spare a glance at them. When they saw all of this clearly, all sorts of expressions appeared on their faces. His expression was one of regret. There was helplessness, realization, and bitterness. Obviously, they instantly knew the changes that had happened to Hun Guzi and the others, and they also knew what they were going to compete for next. That's more reasonable. Otherwise, it would be too unfair if those who work hard were treated the same as those who drag the team down. After a long time, Jing Yitzi sighed. Right at this moment, Hun Guzi and the others released their true sage sacred arts. In an instant, the entire world was enveloped in the power of countless true sage sacred arts. It was born from the confrontation between the sacred arts of the true sages. Layers of treasure light swept across the entire world at this moment, even penetrating out of the world and pressing down on the various worlds. This was because Hun Guzi and the others didn't need to say anything at all. They had already started fighting. At this moment, Luo Fan's figure flashed, and he had already hidden in this world. He was the furthest away from their battlefield. When he appeared here, Jing Yitzi and the others also appeared beside him at the same time. However, compared to Luo Fan's relaxed manner, Jing Yitzi and the others seemed to have used some kind of mysterious pseudo-sage sacred art to be able to arrive here in an instant. The reason why there was such a difference was because Luo Fan was the creator of this world, so he had an extremely high authority over this world. Naturally, he could control this world as he pleased, directly traversing through this incomparably powerful space and time in an instant. However, Jing Yitzi and the others didn't have such authority, so they could only rely on their own sacred arts to do this. It seems that it's impossible to complete it in a short period of time. After standing still, Jing Yitzi turned to look at the battlefield that was getting bigger and bigger inside. No one will give up the opportunity to prove their Tao. They're already fighting to the death now. Luo Fan smiled. Tao. Jing Yitzi smiled, but there was a hint of disdain in his eyes. Tao friend, you don't seem to think that this is the opportunity to prove your Tao? Luo Fan looked at his expression and asked thoughtfully. Jing Yitzi laughed and said, No, you're thinking too much. Seeing that Jing Yitzi was unwilling to say more, Luo Fan didn't ask anymore and said, I see. After saying that, he didn't say anything else and just quietly watched the battle between the sacred arts of the true sages. It seems that after experiencing so many things, everyone's control of the sacred arts of the true sages has improved greatly. Luo Fan observed for a while and came to a conclusion in his heart. At this moment, the sacred arts that Hun Guzi and the others used were no different from the sacred arts they used when they fought against Jin Shanzi and the others. However, each of them was able to control the sacred arts of the true sages and stimulate their potential at a faster speed. In an extremely short period of time, the sacred arts of the true sages reached a power that would normally take several months to activate. This kind of performance, although they couldn't retract the sacred arts of the true sages as easily as Luo Fan, it was still a huge improvement compared to the past. If they were to face their past selves again, they would definitely be able to suppress their past selves in a short period of time. If they were lucky, it wouldn't be unbelievable for them to win the battle. Because everyone's control of the sacred arts of the true sages had improved, the battle between them had reached its climax. If it wasn't for the fact that this world was really powerful, everything in this world would have been completely crushed by the power that leaked out from the battle of the sacred arts, just like the world that had been used as a battlefield previously. But even so, the world was still trembling at every moment. It was as if every location, including the void above, was experiencing increasingly intense earthquakes. What a powerful world! Jing Yitzi exclaimed again. It could only shake in the aftermath of the battle of the sacred arts of the true sages. However, it didn't shatter. The power of this world was indeed shocking. Perhaps this can be an opportunity for us, a false sage suddenly said. Upon hearing this, most of the false sages' eyes lit up. As false sages, their thinking was so sharp that it was beyond the imagination of all living beings. Although the false sage had only said one sentence, all the false sages present already knew what he meant. The people in front of them, who were only one step away from becoming a sage with the mysteries of the true sage, were engaged in an endless battle, but they had unknowingly given up the mysteries of the true sage. This allowed these false sages to obtain an opportunity that was originally impossible for them. The opportunity to become a sage with the mysteries of the true sage level. This is not bad. At this moment, Jing Yitzi looked eager to give it a try. When Luo Fan saw this, he couldn't help but be curious. From his previous performance, it was obvious that he didn't think that he could become a true sage with the help of the mysteries of the true sage level in this world. In that case, why was he so eager to give it a try now? Jing Yitzi naturally didn't care what Luo Fan was thinking. He quickly continued, "Do you want me to help you distort time? Fellow Taoist, don't you want to seize this opportunity?" Luo Fan asked curiously. Compared to this opportunity, I'm more looking forward to the upcoming battle of a larger scale, Jing Yitzi said without hiding anything. Upon hearing this, Luo Fan suddenly understood why Jing Yitzi was so eager to give it a try. It turned out that Jing Yitzi could tell at a glance that once they seized this opportunity and wanted to use the mysteries of the true sage level to become a sage, they would become the enemies of the false sages who were currently fighting. When they cultivated to the same level as those false sages, that was when they would be dragged into the battlefield. At that time, those who appeared in this world, obviously, it would be a battle of a larger scale. When Luo Fan heard Jing Yitzi's words, the other false sages naturally heard it too. For a moment, although the expressions of the false sages did not change, their eyes were filled with solemnity. They wanted to seize the opportunity, but they were not willing to be dragged into the battle on the battlefield. In the end, all of them could not resist the temptation of using the mysteries of the true sage to become a sage. All of them directly distorted the time they were in and accelerated the flow of time. They began to wholeheartedly comprehend the mysteries of the great Tao of heaven and earth, trying to take the first step to become a sage in this world. As for asking Jing Yitzi to help them distort time, none of them took it seriously. Distorting time was just a thought for them. Even though it was much more difficult in this world because of the extremely shocking stability of time, it was just a matter of a little bit of power. It was not much difficult. Since that was the case, why should they ask Jing Yitzi for help? When Jing Yitzi saw that almost all of them were already immersed in cultivation, the anticipation on his face became even stronger. However, looking at the increasingly terrifying battlefield in the distance and the extremely calm crowd around him, he still revealed a hint of dissatisfaction. He immediately said, "This is still too slow. I'll distort time again for you guys." Chapter 1528. As time distorted again, the many pseudo-sages instantly realized that the flow of time they were experiencing had suddenly sped up countless times. In an instant, they all understood who was doing this. For a moment, they didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Of course, although they didn't know whether to laugh or cry, none of them asked Jing Yitzi to stop distorting time. Anyway, to them, the faster the flow of time, the more benefits they could obtain. Why not? Compared to when Hun Guzi and the others distorted time to comprehend the mysteries of the great Tao when the world was being constructed, the effect of distorting time when the world had already stabilized was much worse. After all, before the world was completely constructed, distorting the flow of time within one's body was equivalent to distorting the flow of time in the outside world. In comparison, the flow of time in the outside world was equivalent to the flow of time in the outside world. The effect of cultivating under such a distorted time was no different from cultivating for such a long period of time normally. Now that the world had stabilized, the situation was completely different. Because the world had stabilized, the time of the world had naturally stabilized as well. Distorting the time around them would only change themselves. The flow of time in the outside world would still be the same as before. No matter how much time they spent inside, the time in the outside world would not be affected at all. It would not waver at all. In this way, their interaction with the world would naturally be reduced by countless times. The effect of their cultivation. Naturally, it was far from comparable to the effect of cultivating for so long normally. Therefore, even with Jing Yixi's help, the flow of time where there was not inferior to the flow of time that Han Guzi and the others had distorted previously. However, it still took them more than half a year to break through the distorted time and return to the normal world. Previously, Han Guzi and the others had already experienced billions of years in that short period of time. Now, they had stayed in the outside world for half a year with a similar flow of time. It was almost unimaginable how long the time they had experienced was. But they had experienced such a long time. At this moment, among the many false saints, only more than half had broken through the limit and reached the realm where they were only one step away from becoming a false saint with the mysteries of the true saint level. Less than half of them were stuck at the level of a paramount venerable. They felt that there was still a huge gap between them and being able to achieve it. It was a gap that could not be crossed. What a pity. In the end, I still can't do it. Those pseudo-sages who had failed exchanged glances with each other, their eyes filled with helplessness. The reason why they couldn't reach the same level as others wasn't because they didn't have enough potential. It was because the number of cultivators that could be supported by the true sage level mysteries of the Great Path was already full. When they reached the final step of their cultivation and needed to obtain the final breakthrough, they discovered that the profound mysteries of the true saint stage had already started to repel them, causing them to be unable to comprehend it and dig out the principles within it. Using a certain mystery to prove one's Tao and become a saint was not directly seizing that mystery and fusing it into one's own body, nor was it fusing one's own body into that mystery. It was an even more mysterious and profound process. It could not even be described with words, nor could it be described in any special way. However, it had a special characteristic. That was, once a false sage used it as a foundation to prove his Tao and become a sage, these mysteries would start to reject other cultivators who used it to prove their Tao and become a sage. When a number of false sages who used this mystery to prove their Tao and become sages increased, the repulsive force would become stronger. In the end, when a number of false sages increased to a certain limit, that mystery would completely reject all other cultivators. It was the same for all Great Path mysteries. It was the same for the mysteries of the true sage level. Although at this moment, no false sage used the mysteries of the true sage level to prove their Tao and become a sage, every time one tried to use it as a basis to break through to the false sage stage and survived, some characteristics of the false sage level would naturally appear on the mysteries of the true sage level. As such, when a number of mysteries increased to a certain level, the mysteries of the true sage level would be similar to when it had reached its limit, and there was no more space for ordinary cultivators to comprehend. At this moment, the extremely few true sage level mysteries could not continue to cultivate and improve because of this. They could only stop here. It seems like I have no choice but to join in after all, a false sage sighed. Hearing this, other than Luo Fan and a few others, all the other false sages had an inexplicable fighting spirit in their eyes. Among them, there were not only those who had reached the same realm as Han Guzi and the others and were just a little bit away from proving their Tao and becoming a false sage of heaven and earth, but also those who had failed. Needless to say, those who were only one step away from succeeding did so in order to defeat all the other competitors and obtain one of the 10 spots. The remaining false sages who had failed did not give up hope. Because they were a step too late, the mysteries of the true sage level had already been completely occupied by others. That was why they could not break through and improve. Under such circumstances, how could they be willing to give up? In a battle between true sage mystical abilities, the slower one joined, the more advantageous one would be. Instead, it was the exact opposite. The earlier one joined, the more advantageous one would be. This was because the true sage mystical ability would continuously stimulate one's potential as the battle progressed. The longer one participated in the battle, the more potential it would stimulate and the more powerful it would become. Therefore, it could be said that these false sages had already suffered a great loss after delaying for such a long time to join the battle. Moreover, not only did they suffer a great loss in terms of time, but they also suffered a great loss in terms of strength. This was because Hun Guzi and the others were the founders of this world and had a lot of authority in this world. When they fought in this world, they could also receive a lot of support from this world. Their power was much stronger than when they were at normal times. In contrast, the false sages who arrived later did not have such support at all. In this aspect, they would be greatly suppressed by Hun Guzi and the others. The false sages were decisive. Since they had already made their decision, none of them delayed any further. They looked at each other, raised their hands, and pointed. Their respective true sage mystical abilities were blasted out by them. Moreover, each of them did not just blast out one true sage mystical ability. Instead, they unleashed all of their strength and blasted out all the true sage mystical abilities that they could master. They pounced into the terrifying battlefield that had been developed for half a year. In an instant, it was already intense to begin with. The battle between the true sage mystical abilities skyrocketed once again. In the blink of an eye, the scene became more than 10 times more intense than before. Outside the battlefield, Luo Fan had an inexplicable bitter smile on his face. Beside him, other than Jing Yitzi, only 3 false sages floated there quietly. These 3 false sages, from the very beginning, they were the same as Jing Yitzi. They were also false sages who did not choose a faction. In other words, false sages who did not participate in the battle at all. Now that they were here, it was obvious that they were like Luo Fan in the past. Just like Jing Yitzi, they had never tried to prove their Tao in this world with the mysteries of the true sage level. Of course, their expressions at this moment were not as bitter as Luo Fan's, but they did not have an inexplicable excitement like Jing Yitzi either. It was as if they were watching a super blockbuster. Instead, they watched the tragic battle in front of them calmly. It seems that they will probably need a few thousand years to come to an end. Luo Fan sighed. Isn't that great? Such an exciting scene will actually last for a few thousand years. Isn't that something to be happy about? Jing Yitzi laughed out loud at this moment. Luo Fan became helpless and said, Exciting? Don't you think that a few thousand years is too long? It's only a few thousand years. How long is that? Jing Yitzi turned around and looked at Luo Fan with a surprised expression. Of course, it's not considered long under normal circumstances. However, don't forget when this is. This is the time when the order of the various realms is being rebuilt. If we waste a few thousand years like this, who knows when there will be new problems and trouble, Luo Fan said helplessly. What does the situation of the various realms have to do with us? Jing Yitzi laughed. When Luo Fan heard that, he sighed and did not speak anymore. Although he did not have any real evidence, he had an inexplicable feeling in his heart. It seemed that if he continued to delay like this, there would be some variables that would eventually lead to some extremely serious consequences. Even though he was already a false sage, and could even be called the strongest false sage, this inexplicable feeling was still vague and indistinct. It seemed to be extremely clear, but it also seemed to be just an illusion. He could not be sure at all. Just as the tragic battle was going on in this world, outside this world, a large area of nothingness was filled with layers of treasure lights. These treasure lights were different from before. They seemed to be projecting the scene of the world, evolving countless mysterious changes of light and shadow in the void, displaying the mysterious conflict between countless true sage theurgies. All of these factors caused this area to become so mysterious, so lively, and so unbelievable. In this area, the vast thousand realms that originally existed had already disappeared without a trace in the previous upheavals. Some were sent flying, some were melted, and some even disappeared without a trace. As a result, apart from the treasure lights, there were only two worlds here. Apart from the world that Luo Fan and the others were in, there was also the world that had been transformed by a true sage. Outside these layers of treasure lights, there were many vast thousand realms piled up here. The false sages who would not give up on any changes related to the true sage level did not appear at this time. After experiencing Hunguzi and the others' blatant robbery, all the false sages had already clearly understood the gap between themselves and these true sage disciples. They had long known that getting involved in this kind of thing would only bring them bad luck, and among the surrounding vast thousand realms, there seemed to be a few vast thousand realms that seemed a little special at the same time in the layers of treasure lights. In the world that had been transformed by a true sage, such a conversation took place. Senior, why don't you go over? It seems that the seniors seem to have obtained a lot of benefits in that world and are now competing with each other. I can't compete with them. The person who spoke was a false sage and the heaven sealer sage born in this world. The false sages born in this world were born because the heaven sealer sage and the others were born before them. They were their guides and helped them become false sages. Therefore, even though they had become false sages, they still addressed Jean Chanzi, the heaven sealer sage, and the others as seniors. At this moment, the heaven sealer sage was floating at the highest point of his world. He raised his head and quietly looked at the endless treasure lights coming from outside the world. His expression was rather calm. Beside him, there were a few male and female false sages. After Hunguzi and the others completely left, this world seemed to have undergone some inexplicable changes. However, this change was really subtle. Even the heaven sealer sage. But he could not detect what exactly this change was. However, in comparison, there were more things that did not change in this world. This was because the number of continents in this world did not change, and the projection of the great Tao of heaven and earth did not change. Generally speaking, it was not much different from when they were still around. It was as if all the changes had been fixed. At this moment, the eyes of the false sages born in this world were filled with an inexplicable light. Obviously, they were extremely interested in what was happening in that world. That's a benefit that many seniors want to snatch. How great would it be if I could obtain it? This kind of similar thought kept lingering in their hearts. However, although they had this kind of thought, it was impossible for them to leave this world. Without the support of the great Tao of other worlds, it was impossible for them, false sages, to break through the shackles of this world and leave this world. Moreover, these false sages were only projections. They relied on the great Tao of projection to cultivate and were still different from real false sages. The difficulty of breaking through the shackles of this world was more than 10 times or even 100 times more difficult than ordinary false sages breaking through the shackles of this world. This made it even more impossible for them to break through the shackles of this world and participate in the competition of those seniors. In comparison, the Heaven Sealer Sage did not have such restrictions. Although all the great Tao fragments in his body had been taken away, there were dozens of worlds in his body. These worlds were enough to support his false sage godhood, allowing him to maintain his false sage godhood in any world and in any void. In other words, he was a false sage no matter where he was. In this way, it was obvious that this world could not become his shackles at all. It could not restrict him from leaving this world. However, at this moment, the Heaven Sealer Sage only floated there quietly. He only raised his head and looked at the endless treasure light that penetrated from outside the world. He had no intention of participating in the competition at all. The reason was that apart from thinking that he could not compete with the disciples of the true sages, it was also because he could not afford to fail. If the disciples of the true sages fought with the true sage theurgy and failed, they would only lose a true sage theurgy. As long as they ran fast, their lives would not be affected at all. However, it was different for him. Although he had the true saint-level heaven ceiling formation, it was his source. If he failed and the heaven ceiling formation was destroyed, he would immediately split into 300 false sages again. The dozens of worlds that had fused with his body would also instantly leave his body. At that time, although he would not die, it would be similar to a true sage dying without a burial place. It was precisely because the possibility of winning was negligible and failure would mean losing his original eternal life that the Heaven Sealer Sage had no interest in participating in the competition at this time. In fact, he did not even have the thought of leaving this world. You guys don't have to think about it. The disciples of the true sages are originally different from all of us. The Heaven Sealer Sage said calmly when he saw the other false sages who were eager to try. Disciples of the true sages. What kind of existence is a true sage? A false sage lamented. His words made the scene fall silent. An existence like a true sage was too heavy a topic for any false sage. It was a realm that all false sages dreamed of reaching, and it was also a realm that made all false sages feel despair. To a false sage, it was their everything. At the same time, it was also the source of their destruction. Time passed slowly. 3,000 years passed in the blink of an eye. On this day, the battle in that vast world had finally reached its final moment. Puff, puff, puff. Amidst the muffled sounds, dozens of figures broke through the barrier of the world one after another and were slapped out of the world. They were directly swept up by the powerful true sage theurgy and sent into the depths of the void. The figures that appeared first were the last to enter this world. They were the false sages that Jing Yitzi had helped them distort time. These false sages, every one of them looked miserable at this moment. Although there were no injuries on their bodies, all their strength and techniques had been suppressed by the true sage theurgy. They couldn't even move, not to mention using any means to resist. They actually worked together to clear the place first. They're really too evil. In that world, at the furthest place from the battlefield, Jing Yitzi seemed to be very indignant as she complained to Luo Fan. Isn't this normal? The competition between them is still considered an internal competition. But when you guys came, it's like picking the fruit without any disguise. How could they be willing? First, they worked together to drive you guys away and clear the place. This is already considered a very merciful method, right? Luo Fan said faintly. Through this conversation, it was very easy to see what exactly happened just now. In particular, at this moment, in this world, only Hun Guzi and the other false sages that constructed this world were still fighting. This point alone was enough to tell what exactly happened. Just now, Hun Guzi and the others had used their extraordinary tacit understanding to attack the others together. They had instantly broken through the true sage theurgy that had been suppressed for 3,000 years and had directly launched some kind of true sage-level attack on the false sages. These false sages broke through this world and headed into the depths of the void. However, they didn't even kill us. That's not interesting. Jing Yitzi was still a little dissatisfied. Seriously speaking, those are the people you should call senior brother, senior sister, junior brother, and junior sister, Luo Fan said helplessly. What does it matter? I don't think they treat me as a senior brother or junior brother. Since that's the case, what's wrong with me thinking that way? Jing Yitzi smiled. Luo Fan just shook his head and didn't say anything else. At this time, Hun Guzi and the others' true sage theurgy were also close to their limits. The outcome of the battle between them would be decided soon. Moreover, after all the fruit pickers were sent away, they no longer had any scruples and seemed to be pouring all the power of the true sage theurgy onto the others. After 3,000 years of development, the intensity of the battle that had already reached an unimaginable level increased once again. After 3,000 years of fighting with the true sage theurgy in this world, Hun Guzi and the others had improved a lot compared to 3,000 years ago. Originally, they had only cultivated in seclusion. In this world, they had finally completely grasped the cultivation realm that was only one step away from the false sage realm. All the power had finally been completely integrated into their own instincts. Compared to 3,000 years ago, each of their auras had become more condensed. The faint aura that surpassed the false sage aura that they originally exuded had also become purer and clearer at this moment. All of these improvements had greatly strengthened their control of the true sage theurgy. The power that the true sage theurgy could unleash in their hands was also much stronger than before. It was also because of this improvement that the world could still maintain its integrity at this moment. It wasn't like the world that had been transformed by the true sage before, which had completely turned into a ruin that didn't even exist. At this moment, the entire world was still vast and boundless. The sky was still high and deep, and the sea was still vast and boundless. However, all the yuan qi that originally existed in the form of a solid state had been completely shattered at this time. It had completely integrated into the space-time of this world and into the indescribably complicated laws and laws. It had unknowingly caused some mysterious changes in this world. Suddenly, Luo Fan frowned and raised his head to look outside the world. Chapter 1529. However, although Luo Fan could feel that he was being spied on, this kind of spying was so obscure that even he himself felt that it was faintly discernible. He couldn't find the source of it at all, and he wasn't even sure if it was his own illusion. When he saw that Jing Yitzi and the others didn't react at all, as if everything was normal and there wasn't anyone spying on them, he didn't feel relaxed at all. Instead, he raised his guard to the highest level. At his level, it was almost impossible for something like an illusion to appear in his mind. Therefore, the feeling of being watched definitely existed. However, Jing Yitzi and the rest were completely unable to sense it. Even he felt that it was faintly discernible and difficult to find. The strength of the person who was spying on them was unimaginable. It seems that my premonition that there would be some changes was right. Luo Fan thought to himself. Although he looked indifferent, he had already activated all his thoughts and intelligence to search for the source of the feeling of being watched. Even if it was so obscure, so faintly discernible, and so intermittent, since he was able to sense a trace of it, it meant that he had the possibility of grasping the source of this peeping. There was only one thing he needed, and that was to use his intelligence and his thoughts to the limit. At this moment, the battle between the true sage theurgies in this world had already disappeared from his mind. This change was naturally not known to Jing Yitzi and the others. At this very moment, they all thought that Luo Fan was just like them, paying close attention to the ongoing battle. As time passed, Luo Fan's understanding of the feeling of being watched increased. In the end, he finally found a trace of it. This feeling of being watched comes from outside this world. After discovering this, Luo Fan was even more shocked. The world itself was so powerful. At this moment, there were so many true divine magic powers battling in the world. The battlefield formed by the collision of the true divine powers filled the entire world and everything in the outside world. If they wanted to explore this world, it would definitely trigger a reaction from the many true divine theurgies in the heaven and earth, and he would be attacked by countless true divine theurgies. Even if it was a perception that entered this world from the outside world, it was no exception. During the first battle between Luo Fan and Hungu Zi, the Great Thousand World served as the battlefield. Those who tried to probe into the Great Thousand World were attacked by a true sage's divine ability. Under such circumstances, it was unknown who was spying on them, but they were actually able to peer into this world from outside. This was simply beyond Luo Fan's imagination, and it almost toppled his views. This man, he was stronger than a false sage. At the very least, he's stronger than ordinary false saints. Luo Fan instantly came to a conclusion, judging by his own strength. Even for him now, it was an extremely risky thing to do if he wanted to probe into the heaven and earth where the true divine theurgy was fighting. If he was not careful, he might trigger the true divine theurgy's counterattack and be directly attacked by the true divine theurgy. Now that the spy could do this so easily, it was enough to show that the spy was stronger than him. However, although he thought that the spy was stronger than ordinary false sages, Luo Fan did not think that the spy would be a true sage. If there was a true divine stage existence spying on the battlefield, he would definitely not be able to sense this kind of existence. Although Luo Fan was confident, he was not conceited to the point of comparing himself to a true sage. Therefore, he had a rough understanding of the spy's strength. The spy was above a false sage, but below a true sage. There's actually such a false sage in this world. Luo Fan was extremely shocked. The longer he stayed in the myriad heavens, the more he felt that the myriad heavens was unfathomable. When he first entered the demon realm, he was shocked that there were 54 sages in the demon realm. When he left the demon world and truly entered the myriad worlds, he was shocked by the thousands of false sages in the myriad worlds. Later on, he was shocked by the many true sage disciples who had mastered so many true sage mystiques. Until now, he actually realized that the strength of the world had not been bottomed out yet. There were actually false sages who were even more powerful than the disciples of true sages. It was like a bottomless bag. Anything could be pulled out, and no matter when one put their hand in, they would be able to pull out something that would give them a pleasant surprise. If I'm here with my main body, perhaps the best choice would be to leave directly. However, I'm just a clone. This thought flashed through Luo Fan's mind, and an inexplicable smile suddenly appeared on his face. Originally, he thought that the final change of the world had been completed, and he was still troubled about what to do next. However, it seemed that a brand new world had appeared in front of him. At this moment, in the gap between the world and the state of chaos, the world that Luo Fan had created, which could attract the great tribulation of heaven and earth, had yet to undergo the sixth great tribulation of heaven and earth. It was not because the world had yet to undergo the tribulation, but because the time was not up yet. According to the normal time dimension of the world, the sixth great tribulation of heaven and earth should have descended many years ago. However, after Luo Fan witnessed the wonders of the world, he suddenly felt that it would be more beneficial for him to stay a little longer in the world. Therefore, he reduced the flow of time in the world according to his supreme authority as the creator of the world. Although the reduced flow of time was still many times faster than the time dimension of the Earth's universe, it was enough to delay the arrival of the sixth great tribulation of heaven and earth by many years. At the very least, at this moment, the projection of Luo Fan's clone could stay in the world as long as he wanted. He did not have to worry about the world surviving the great tribulation of heaven and earth. The clone had no choice but to leave the entire Earth's universe and enter the state of chaos with the world at this moment. In that world, Luo Fan's main body was sitting cross-legged in the gray, strange state of chaos. He looked like a lifeless object without any aura. Suddenly, Luo Fan opened his eyes. There was excitement in his eyes, but there was also some doubt. There's actually an even stronger existence. It seems that I made the right choice to stay. His excitement was naturally because of what he said. As for his doubt, it was because of another point. Such a powerful existence. Could it be that they really don't know the way to open up the world and attract the great tribulation of heaven and earth to refine the world, break away from the world, and obtain true freedom? If they knew, why would they still stay in the Earth's universe? It was this doubt. This made him feel a little nervous. Let's wait and see. After a long time, in the end, Luo Fan let out a sigh. He closed his eyes again. Just as Luo Fan's main body closed his eyes again, in the universe where Luo Fan's clone was located. At this moment, Luo Fan's expression suddenly changed. Of course, this was not because his main body's thoughts had changed, but because he had discovered something that shocked him even more. There was not only one person spying on him. Instead, there were several of them. In other words, Luo Fan was spying on the world in a way that he could not understand. He was spying on the true sage mystiques that were currently fighting here. There was not just one unimaginably powerful false sage, but several false sages. The shock that this fact brought to him was even greater than when he discovered that there was only one peeping on him. If there was only one spy, he could still think that it was just a false saint who had encountered some incredible encounter. So his strength had broken through the limit and reached a level that far surpassed the many true saints in him. Although this was surprising, it was still acceptable. However, if there was more than one spy, then the situation would be completely different. If there was not only one spy, it obviously meant that the spy could not have obtained an abnormal improvement because of some fortuitous encounter or some opportunity. Instead, there was a special method that could allow a false saint to obtain such an improvement. Moreover, in the past, there had already been many false saints who had achieved such an improvement. This was simply showing that Luo Fan and the other true saint's disciples were just frogs at the bottom of a well. How could there not be more shock? There are at least 5 false saints spying on me. Luo Fan carefully distinguished and gradually figured out the number and level of the spies. Of course, it was only a rough estimate. After all, these spies were beyond him. It was already considered that his senses were sharp and his strength was astonishing to be able to distinguish a rough estimate. Trying to figure out the exact number of spies was beyond his ability. Were they planning? Were they planning? Luo Fan was filled with doubts. He floated quietly, and with a thought, he slowly pulled out the karma net from his body. It landed in his hand, and he played with it gently. His actions finally attracted the attention of Jing Yitzi and the others. Fellow Taoist, are you also interested? Jing Yitzi looked at the super karma net in Luo Fan's hand that looked like an ordinary silk net, and an inexplicable expression appeared on her face. She said, hearing this, Luo Fan just shook his head and said, of course not. If I was interested, why would I wait until now? Then, why are you holding such a dangerous thing in your hand? Jing Yitzi asked curiously. Luo Fan smiled faintly and said, oh, it's just to train my control of this remarkable ability. Don't worry about it, fellow Taoist. Of course, this was a lie. Not to mention Jing Yitzi, even an ordinary cultivator who had a slight understanding of false saints would not believe this. How could a false saint be so bored? In an instant, Jing Yitzi and the others were inexplicably vigilant. Something must have happened. Otherwise, this person would definitely not take out this remarkable ability. From the looks of it, he's obviously guarding against something. Could it be that something abnormal is going to happen in this world? Jing Yitzi thought to himself. Although the smile on his face did not change, the true saint aura in his body began to slowly brew. Jing Yitzi had such a keen awareness, and the other false saints were naturally no exception. At this moment, although there was no change on everyone's face, their power was already constantly brewing. Luo Fan did not care about their behavior at all. At this moment, he could already feel that the inexplicable spying gazes seemed to suddenly focus on him, as if they felt that he had already discovered them. However, it was obvious that Luo Fan did not carry much weight at this time. After focusing on him for a while, the spying shifted away and began to pay attention to the many false saints who were fighting in the world. Although the battle between the true saints' remarkable abilities had already reached the final stage, however, the result was still far away. Obviously, it would still take some time. Next, as the battle between the true saints' remarkable abilities became increasingly vast and shocking, several years passed. On this day, the battle between Hun Guzi and the others finally came to an end. Finally, a true saint's remarkable ability that had reached a certain limit was shattered by another true saint's remarkable ability. A kind of power that belonged to a true saint's remarkable ability directly descended on the false saint whose true saint's remarkable ability had been shattered. It directly blasted through this part of the world with the false saint's remarkable ability and shot directly into the depths of the void. This was like a chain reaction. Following that, the true saint's remarkable abilities collapsed one after another. The owners of the true saint's remarkable abilities were also sent out of the world one by one, shooting into the depths of the void irresistibly. The entire process was so straightforward that it was beyond imagination. In just a few days, only the 10 false saints, including Hunguzi, were left on the battlefield after thousands of years of controlling the true saints' remarkable abilities to fight. Each of these false saints had made great progress compared to before. The aura all over their bodies increasingly had the charm of a true saint, and their control of the true saint's remarkable abilities had also improved by leaps and bounds. Although they hadn't reached the point where they could retain the true saint's remarkable abilities like Luo Fan, it could be imagined that the next time they used the true saint's remarkable abilities, they would definitely be able to push the power of the true saint's remarkable abilities to the level that they originally needed to fight with the true saint's remarkable abilities for more than 100 years before they could unleash its power. We finally succeeded. The 10 false saints looked at each other with indescribable excitement in their eyes. In an instant, the entire world began to be filled with endless Tao sounds out of nowhere. Mysterious rays of light emerged in the void, and countless strange heavenly flowers fell from the sky. All sorts of strange phenomena instantly appeared in the world. The appearance of the endless phenomena instantly made the barren world seem to be covered with a layer of gorgeous clothes. The entire place looked so gorgeous and gorgeous. However, Luo Fan and the others instantly discerned with a single glance that these phenomena were clearly the scene of Hunguzi and the others truly taking the final step to attain the Tao and becoming false saints with the true saint rank profundities of the heavens and the earth. At this moment, Luo Fan suddenly felt that the existence of those spying on him seemed to have suddenly become many times stronger. It was also this strengthening that made Jing Yitzi finally feel the existence of those spying on him. What's going on? Jing Yitzi and the others' expressions changed drastically. At this moment, they instinctively cast their gazes towards Luo Fan. In a flash, they instantly understood what was going on with Luo Fan's various abnormal actions. There was no expression on Luo Fan's face at this moment. With a thought, he lifted his body and took a step forward, directly breaking through the world and heading towards the outside world. You really sensed it long ago. A leisurely voice instantly rang in Luo Fan's ears. Luo Fan's heart trembled, and he released the karma net in his hand without hesitation. In an instant, it formed an extremely tight defense around his body. Right at this moment, an irresistible force suddenly pressed down on his karmic web. This force also had the characteristics of a true saint ability, but its changes were many times more complicated and faster than Luo Fan's karma net. Before the karma net could unleash its power and transform into a mysterious force, it had already directly pressed the karma net. Together with Luo Fan, who was inside, they were pressed back into the world. When Luo Fan and the karma net returned to the world, the force with the characteristics of a true saint ability was easily retracted. It was completely not restricted by the characteristics of a true saint's ability that would entangle with a true saint ability for eternity. It was simply like an ordinary ability. You guys, who are you? Luo Fan looked around and found that his position was exactly the same as before. There was no change at all, and his heart had already sunk to the bottom. A chuckle. A response to Luo Fan's chuckle. However, it was just a chuckle, and no one really answered Luo Fan's question. That kind of disregard, that kind of disdain. But it was just a chuckle. Although Jing Yitzi and the other's strength was not comparable to Luo Fan's, they were also not comparable to the existence that pressed Luo Fan and the karma net back together. But their observation skills were definitely not bad. Just now when Luo Fan left, then he used a true saint's ability to protect himself and then was easily pressed back. Everything that happened during the whole process, they could all see it clearly. For a moment, all of them felt an indescribable pressure, as if there was an incomparably huge shadow above their heads, and they could no longer see any light. Regarding their disdain, Luo Fan did not care in his heart. The strong naturally had the right to treat the weak in any way. If you want to have dignity, then the only way is to become strong yourself. Apart from that, Any resentment or hatred would not help. Compared to their disdain, Luo Fan was more concerned about another point at this time. He said, "Your target should be them, right? If that's the case, why did you leave me here?" Previously, Luo Fan did not know, but at this time, when Hun Guzi and the others finally fought until there were only 10 false saints left, the spies instantly changed. From this point, Luo Fan was already quite clear about their target, even if he did not know what they wanted to do to Hun Guzi and the others. However, this time, Luo Fan's words did not even get a chuckle. It was as if he was talking to the air. "I didn't expect that there would be such a wonderful ending. This time it's not in vain." Jing Yitzi suddenly laughed at this time. Luo Fan glanced at him and found that there was an indescribable excitement in his eyes at this time. The true saint aura on his body had become so strong that it almost materialized, and it was faintly repelling the karma net around Luo Fan's body. It was clear that he had already brewed his true saint remarkable ability to the limit and could release it at any time. Although the other false sages did not react as quickly as Jing Yitzi, their bodies also gradually emitted the aura of a true sage. Under the effect of these auras, the distance between the few of them had unknowingly increased. Just as such changes were happening on Luo Fan's side, the process of Hun Guzi and the others proving their Tao and becoming saints was still progressing in an orderly manner. Hun Guzi and the others' methods of proving their Tao and becoming saints were naturally different. However, they were all relying on the true saint-level mysteries of the Great Tao. At this time, countless mysterious phenomena that existed in the entire world were constantly gathering towards them. Moreover, because of the different methods they used to prove their Tao and become saints, they had different priorities. Unknowingly, the Great Tao in the unseen world was gradually manifesting in the void above. This Great Tao was already vast and boundless when it appeared in the void back then. At this moment, when it manifested in the void, its vastness and profoundness had increased by tens of thousands of times at the same time. At this moment, it seemed that even the entire world seemed so tiny and insignificant before this Great Tao. Not to mention Hun Guzi and the other false saints. After the Great Tao manifested, it seemed to possess some kind of incredible attraction force. It began to affect the 10 false saints, causing Hun Guzi and the others to gradually float up. Accompanied by the endless phenomenon, they slowly drifted towards the Great Tao that existed in the void. Chapter 1530. The entire world began to tremble slightly due to these changes. A strange feeling was emitted from the world. In a trance, it seemed as if the world was becoming more and more complete and stable. The world allowed cultivators to become false saints and obtain eternity and indestructibility. They were omniscient, omnipotent, and omnipotent. This was undoubtedly an extremely huge benefit to cultivators and could even be considered favor. However, at the same time, the appearance of a false saint was not just a burden to the world. On the contrary, the appearance of a false saint would suppress the structure of the world and make the operation of the Great Tao of the world more stable, allowing the power of the Great Tao to circulate more smoothly. This was also a great benefit to the world. In other words, the appearance of a false saint was like a powerful magic treasure suppressing fate, suppressing the world. To an ordinary world, the appearance of an ordinary false saint would not have too much of an impact on the world. After all, in an ordinary world, a false saint would only rely on the mysteries of the false saint. To an ordinary Great Tao of the world, there were countless mysteries of the false saint level. The appearance of a few false saints would not have much of an impact on it. However, it was a different story when placed in this world. Although this world was many times stronger than ordinary worlds that could give birth to false saints, there were true saint-level mysteries in it. Under such circumstances, if a cultivator used the mysteries of the true saint level to become a false saint, the suppression on this world would be thousands or even tens of thousands of times stronger than that of an ordinary false saint. At this moment, there were 10 false saints who had used the mysteries of the true saint level to become false saints. This suppression on this world was many times stronger than that of an ordinary false saint. Naturally, the suppression on this world was many times stronger than that of an ordinary false saint. It was also because of this that the appearance of these false saints caused such an obvious change in this world. It was also because of this that the appearance of these false saints caused such obvious signs of suppression. As time passed, Hunguzi's group of 10 rapidly ascended into the void and gradually sank into the darkness, submerging into the Great Tao. On the Great Tao, apart from the dense and endless mysteries of the Great Tao, there were also countless spacetimes that were born because of the mysteries of the Great Tao. In fact, although these spacetimes behaved no different from ordinary spacetimes, their nature was slightly different. But, in essence, it was not a normal spacetime. In essence, it was a certain combination of the mysteries of the Great Tao, a certain transformation. At this moment, in the depths of the Great Tao, 10 strange space-time spaces suddenly appeared out of thin air. These 10 spacetimes weren't born from other mysteries. Instead, they were born from the extremely small number of true saint-grade mysteries that existed in this world. In this way, the 10 spacetimes that were born divided up all the mysteries of the true sage level in the Great Tao, allowing those mysteries of the true sage level to seep into the 10 spacetimes. As a result, the vast Great Tao could no longer feel the existence of the mysteries of the true sage level. At this moment, Hunguzi's group of 10 were heading towards one of these 10 spaces. During this process, the Great Path produced all kinds of mysterious and indescribable changes. All kinds of incredible light and shadows flashed on the Great Path, and all kinds of unimaginable waves circled above it. Everything looked so mysterious and incredible. The entire process seemed to take a long time to describe, but it actually happened very quickly. Soon, Hunguzi's group of 10 had entered the 10 strange spacetimes formed from the true sage level mysteries. When the 10 of them entered, an indescribable joy suddenly spread throughout the world. An indescribable joy suddenly spread throughout the entire world. It wrapped around Luo Fan, Jing Yitzi, and the others, and even spread out, declaring its joy to the numerous great thousand worlds outside of this world. This was the joy of the world, the joy of the will of heaven and earth that was deeply hidden, obscure, and difficult to detect. Clearly, the world was extremely happy for the birth of Hunguzi's group of 10 false sages. Amidst this joy, 10 figures once again condensed in this world. Then boundless vitality spread out, and the entire world was instantly filled with boundless vitality. With the appearance of vitality, the originally barren world began to change rapidly. In the blink of an eye, it was already filled with countless shades of green. These were the countless plants that appeared on the ground. After these shades of green appeared, they began to grow rapidly in a way that exceeded all normal laws, and earth-shattering changes occurred almost in the blink of an eye. In just a short span of a few dozen breaths, the originally barren land had become full of vitality. Countless living beings were born in the void, and on the ground, there were all kinds of forests that covered the entire land. In just a short period of time, the world seemed to have changed into a completely different world than before. Luo Fan looked at the scene in front of him. While he was secretly shocked, he also felt an indescribable sense of helplessness. At this moment, it was naturally shocking to see Hunguzi and the others in high spirits compared to before. However, when he thought about the fact that there were at least 5 powerful existences that he couldn't resist watching them from the outside world and could attack them at any time, he felt that they were a joke. Why? Why aren't they true saints? Hunguzi and the others weren't as high-spirited as Luo Fan thought they were. At this moment, all of them were hovering in the void with looks of disbelief on their faces. This was the only thought that appeared in their minds. The current Hunguzi and the others were naturally many times stronger than before they had successfully proven their Tao in this world. The true saint aura that filled their bodies was no longer emitted by the true saint divine ability, but it was completely emitted by them. It was the aura of a true saint that surpassed all false saint auras. That aura was enough to make Luo Fan feel terrified, and it even felt like it was above him. All these details made them look like true sages at first glance, however. That was only at first glance, in fact. They were still false saints in essence. They still couldn't transcend this world, and they would lose their false saint status after leaving this world. They were false saints that had been completely beaten back to their original state. The true saint aura that they exuded seemed to be purely bestowed by this world. This situation was obviously completely different from what Hangu Zi and the others had expected and wanted to achieve. How could they possibly be excited? One must know that in order to achieve this, they had destroyed many worlds in the universe that could give birth to false sages. They had used thousands of false sages as sacrifices to plead with true sages. They had also fought hard with other people who had also grasped true sage remarkable powers. However, in the end, they still didn't achieve their desired goal. How could they feel at ease? Do you want to turn fake into real and become true saints? At this moment, a leisurely voice entered Hangu Zi and the others' ears. This voice was impressively the same one that had spoken to Luo Fan before. The appearance of this voice instantly caused Hangu Zi and the others' expressions to change drastically. One must know, they were already false saints of this world, and they had become false saints that were many times more powerful than ordinary false saints. Even so, they didn't discover the source of this voice. Before this voice appeared, they didn't even know that this voice would appear. How could they not be shocked by this situation? "Who are you?" Hangu Zi shouted. "How can it be so easy to turn fake into real? If it could be done so easily, there wouldn't be only 7 true saints in this world now. There would have been at least tens of thousands of true saints," the voice continued. Hangu Zi and the others' expressions turned even uglier. Previously, they couldn't find the source of the person's voice, but now that this person had said so many words, they still couldn't find the source of the voice, and they couldn't find the person who was speaking. This was obviously a gap that couldn't be ignored. Hangu Zi and the others made a prompt decision. They raised their hands and grabbed at the air. The pseudo-primordial origin spiritual treasures that they had refined previously appeared in front of them. In the process of proving their Tao and becoming false saints in this world, these pseudo-primordial origin spiritual treasures, as their natal spiritual treasures, were also tempered and improved. At this moment, the improvement of these pseudo-primordial origin spiritual treasures was no less than the improvement that Hangu Zi and the others received. Therefore, at this moment, the aura that these pseudo-primordial origin spiritual treasures exuded was many times stronger than before. Moreover, there was an additional powerful aura that belonged to a true saint, or rather, a primordial origin spiritual treasure. If such an existence appeared in a world that could give birth to false saints, no matter how Hangu Zi and the others tried to restrain it or suppress it, their existence would exceed the limit that the world could bear. It would instantly cause the world to collapse and turn into dust the moment it appeared. However, at this moment, in this world, these pseudo-primordial origin spiritual treasures that were many times more powerful than ordinary pseudo-primordial origin spiritual treasures only slightly distorted time and space. They didn't even exert much pressure on the great Tao, let alone destroy this world. This kind of performance was similar to that of a relatively powerful pseudo-primordial origin spiritual treasure. After these 10 magic treasures appeared, their powerful light gathered together. In an instant, the entire world was covered in a layer of light, forming some kind of defense that seemed to be extremely powerful, but also seemed to only have the appearance of a defensive layer. Looks like the harvest this time isn't small. The voice seemed to be completely unaffected. At this moment, it directly spread into the world, allowing everyone in the world to hear it instantly. Perhaps we should discuss how to divide it. At this moment, another voice suddenly entered everyone's ears. This voice had the characteristics of the first voice, but the tone and tone were completely different. Clearly, it was another person's voice. Although there are 10 of them, it's not enough to divide them. It looks like we need to do another round. Immediately after, another voice entered everyone's ears. That's how it should be. The other three voices sounded at the same time. So there are 6 of them. This thought instantly appeared in Luo Fan's mind. He finally knew the exact number of people who were spying on him. These voices that sounded out one after another. However, the expressions of Hangouzi and the others instantly changed drastically. They originally thought that it was already extremely unbelievable that there was only one. It was enough to make all of them shocked and terrified. However, there was actually not only one, but 6 such powerful existences. This was simply ridiculing them. Come out. Another false saint roared. As they spoke, the true saint aura on their bodies began to skyrocket crazily. In the blink of an eye, it had already surpassed the true saint aura that Luo Fan's karma web could emit. It directly enveloped the entire world in an indescribable light and shadow. It was as if an extremely strange world was enveloping the world, making it impossible for the outside world to see anything in this world. It seemed extremely strange and mysterious. We're already in front of you now, but you can't see it. It's better for you to give up resisting. The first voice that spoke sighed and said. It seemed to be very kind to Hangouzi and the others, but its words caused Hangouzi and the others' aura to become unstable. At this moment, Hangouzi and the others were already the false saints of this world. Any changes in their emotions would naturally be reflected in this world. It would cause all sorts of incredible or profound changes in this world. It was just like how all of them felt at this moment. The exuberant vitality that had just appeared in this world had disappeared without a trace in the blink of an eye. What replaced it was an extremely cruel and desolate killing intent. At this moment, Luo Fan's eyes flashed, and 6 great kiliocosms were suddenly reflected in his eyes. As expected, they've already appeared in front of me. This was the only thought that flashed through his mind. However, he soon threw this thought to the back of his mind and began to focus all his attention on the 6 great kiliocosms. On the surface, the 6 great kiliocosms didn't seem any different from ordinary great kiliocosms. Even if they were placed in front of Luo Fan, he wouldn't be able to discover anything special about them unless he personally entered them. He would only treat them as ordinary great kiliocosms. But at this moment, perhaps it was just as that person had said. They had already appeared in front of him. Therefore, Luo Fan could see the interior of the great kiliocosms with a single glance and clearly see through the uniqueness of the 6 great kiliocosms. After seeing through the uniqueness of the great kiliocosms, Luo Fan felt as if a bolt of lightning had flashed through his heart. He felt as if his entire heart had been illuminated. This is a world that has been refined through unimaginable means. The area of the 6 great kiliocosms was billions of times smaller than ordinary great kiliocosms. Furthermore, the strength of their space-time wasn't something that ordinary great kiliocosms could compare to. It was so much so that even the world that Luo Fan was in seemed to be a little lacking in comparison. From this, one could see how strong the space-time of the strange great kiliocosms was. There was no need to mention the great Tao of the 6 great kiliocosms. Although they were much smaller than the great Tao of ordinary great kiliocosms, their essence was thousands of times stronger than the great Tao of the world that Luo Fan was in at this moment. This could be seen from a number of true saint-level mysteries that existed on the great Tao of this world that were countless times more numerous than the great Tao of this world. So, the world can actually be refined in this way. An inexplicable excitement appeared in Luo Fan's eyes. He had never thought that the world could also be refined, and that through cultivation, the great Tao could be continuously refined and the strength of space-time increased. The existence of the 6 great kiliocosms in front of him seemed to have opened up a whole new cultivation realm in front of him. In a trance, he finally understood what was lacking in his world. Perhaps the world that I've created doesn't need to rely on the great tribulation of the world to be refined. Perhaps using a special method to refine it is also a way to improve. At this thought, Luo Fan suddenly felt a little excited. They can actually see us? At this moment, a voice rang out from the 6 great kiliocosms at almost the same time. This voice directly rang out in Luo Fan's ears. It instantly woke him up from his excited state. At this moment, he had also noticed that there was a figure in each of the 6 great kiliocosms. These figures were all in different locations. Some were in a palace, somewhere above the sea of clouds. Some were in the magma underground, while some were in an ordinary manner. Some were in the shape of a bird's nest on a tree. They were all different. Each of them had their own characteristics, and each had their own wonders. At this moment, the world that Luo Fan was in appeared in everyone's eyes. Hun Guzi and the others had appeared, and even Luo Fan had appeared. Although it was a boundless world that spanned hundreds of millions of light years, the entire world was clearly visible in their narrow eyes. Even the tiniest speck of dust could be seen clearly and distinguished clearly. It was truly unimaginably mysterious. It seems that if we hadn't appeared, you would have been the biggest beneficiary of this tribulation, said a man in one of the 6 great kiliocosms. That man was none other than the one who had spoken to the old man who looked like an old farmer when he had first appeared. Luo Fan saw that they didn't seem to have any intention of making a move. He knew that they didn't really care about this world and thought that they could easily achieve their goals at any time. Therefore, he was not stingy with his time to talk about things that interested them. After discovering their mentality, Luo Fan naturally wouldn't be polite. He asked directly, "Tribulation of the world? What's a tribulation of the world?" Tribulation of the world. It's just a division between us. Almost every time a tribulation of the world is about to descend, there will be a tribulation that will destroy the world. This is the tribulation of the world. Just as Luo Fan thought, the man was not stingy with answering Luo Fan's doubts. Luo Fan's heart skipped a beat when he heard this explanation. There would be one before every tribulation of the world. In that case, this so-called tribulation should be the 8th tribulation. The 8th tribulation, he muttered. It seems that you have more secrets than I imagined. You actually know that the world is about to welcome the 8th tribulation of the world. It's impossible for ordinary false saints to know about such things, said the man calmly. Luo Fan's heart skipped a beat. He smiled and said, "It's just that I know because of my special background. Why do you say that I'll get the greatest benefits if you don't appear? Then what are the so-called benefits?" The man appeared to be very patient at this moment. He explained to Luo Fan very seriously, "Every tribulation is both a tribulation and an opportunity for all false saints. If you plan well, it won't be a problem for you to soar into the sky. If you don't plan well, it won't be strange for you to die. As for you, you have the potential to soar into the sky. If we don't appear, you might have a chance to reach our level." "Your level? What level is that?" Luo Fan hurriedly asked. At this moment, he was extremely curious about the 6 people who had appeared. He wanted to know everything about them as soon as possible. "At our level, strictly speaking, we're still false saints. However, we call ourselves the despairing ones." The man did not speak, but an old man from another major kiliocosm interrupted. There was no expression on the old man's face. It seemed like he would never show any emotions. However, Luo Fan instantly heard some rich emotional fluctuations from this voice. There was despair, hope, struggle, and even discouragement. It was complicated and messy. Almost all kinds of emotions existed. Despairing ones. Luo Fan repeated this title. Suddenly, he felt an incomparably rich meaning and had an inexplicable realization. Despair was different from all other negative emotions. It was an emotion that could only be born after truly understanding the gap between them. Chapter 15:31. Given the realm of a false sage, only a true sage could make them feel despair. Moreover, they actually dared to name themselves as despair. This showed that they definitely had a much deeper understanding of the true saint realm than ordinary false saints. To have a deep understanding of a true divine meant that they were powerful. Therefore, one could imagine how powerful these false sages were since they dared to call themselves desperation. All right, there's no need to say anything more. You can only consider yourself unlucky to have encountered us in this world calamity. Next, let's see how your luck is, another desperation said. Luo Fan was shocked. What do these powerful desperation want to do to him? Just at this moment, the world rumbled as an incomparably powerful shockwave came from all directions. In his eyes, the 6 great thousand realms seemed to have suddenly turned into 6 suns at this moment. They began to emit endless light and heat, directly filling the entire void. The moment the 6 vast worlds emitted light and heat, the endless vast worlds around them seemed to be pushed by a terrifying force. They suddenly moved from extreme stillness and began to shoot into the depths of the void, disappearing without a trace in the blink of an eye. After the great thousand realms disappeared, the starry sky that seemed to be filled with stars became empty. It was as if the starry night had turned into a day without any stars, only the sun. This light and heat seemed to have substance. After coming into contact with a world that Luo Fan was in, it began to squeeze this world and began to crush the powerful defensive layer that Hun Guzi and the others had set up on the surface of this world. It was this kind of squeezing and crushing. At this moment, Luo Fan felt the entire world shaking. How could such an obvious change be hidden from Hun Guzi and the others who were already false sages of this world? For a time, their complexions changed. They crazily stimulated their pseudo-primordial spirit treasures, sending out the might of their pseudo-primordial spirit treasures without holding back in the slightest. They constantly strengthened the defenses of this world, constantly increasing the thickness of the barrier that covered the world. This kind of supplement and thickening caused the terrifying light and heat emitted by the 6 vast worlds to only be able to shake this world. In the end, they couldn't break through this world at all. They couldn't achieve any of the goals they wanted to achieve. "Who the hell are you?" Hun Guzi roared. Such a roar obviously wouldn't get any answer. They were facing the despair of the false saints. They weren't ordinary villains from the secular world. Since they had already made a move, how could they stop and explain the cause and effect? At this moment, the 6 desperators in the 6 great thousand worlds reflected in Luo Fan's eyes simultaneously raised their hands and made a grabbing motion towards the void. In an instant, the boundless light and heat condensed in the void, turning into 6 palms, each coming from a different direction outside the world. They raised their hands and suddenly pinched the world. He wanted to directly crush this heaven and earth. It seems like their goal isn't this world. Luo Fan saw their actions. This thought flashed through his mind. Their actions were clearly targeting false sages like Hun Guzi and the others who had proven their Tao with the mysteries of the true sage level. To deal with false sages, the best method wasn't to directly target false sages, because false sages were simply too powerful. They had too many tricks up their sleeves. To deal with false sages, the best way was to target the source of their success, which was the place where the false sages were born. At this moment, the best way to deal with Hun Guzi and the others was of course to deal with the world where Luo Fan was. Originally, Luo Fan didn't have much time to care about their matters. However, at this time, the 6 desperate ones directly targeted this world. They wanted to destroy this world and then capture Hun Guzi and the others. So he had no choice but to take action. At this moment, he was in this world. Although the destruction of this world wasn't a disaster to him, it would definitely bring him great harm. At that time, after this world was destroyed, he would probably completely lose the ability to resist and could only let the 6 desperate ones do whatever they wanted to do to him. Therefore, at this time, he could only sigh, raise his hand, and point out. In an instant, his karma web suddenly shot out, directly traversing the void, charging out of the world, and fiercely colliding with one of the 6 palms. Although the 6 palms were only condensed from the light and heat emitted from the vast thousand worlds, they contained an extremely deep and rich true sage aura. This aura was even stronger than the true sage aura that Luo Fan had encountered before, apart from his karma net. At this moment, even the true sage aura emitted by Hun Guzi and the others, and even the true sage aura emitted by their pseudo-primordial spiritual treasures, were far inferior to the true sage aura emitted by the 6 palms. It felt as if the 6 palms were the palms of a true sage. One could imagine the power of such palms. Although Luo Fan's karma net was condensed from more than 20 karma nets that had gone through a long battle and had stimulated most of its potential, it was many times more powerful than an ordinary true sage theurgy. However, when facing the 6 palms, its aura was suppressed to the lowest point. Faintly, the karma net didn't emit any aura at this time. It was like a candle flame in the wind that could be extinguished at any time. However, this was, after all, a true sage theurgy. The oppressive aura was also regarded as an attack. After leaving the world, the net of karma naturally emitted an endless amount of mysterious light. All sorts of profound mysteries continuously appeared on the net of karma. In just a short while, the karma net had already undergone countless adjustments. During these adjustments, the true sage aura of the karma net, which was suppressed to the point that it couldn't leak out of its body, gradually rose. Its aura that had completely disappeared gradually appeared. By the time the karma net arrived in front of the target that Luo Fan had chosen, its aura had already changed. There wasn't much difference between it and its normal appearance. It was a loud bang. The void, which was the carrier of the myriad heavens and realms, instantly produced an indescribable vibration. Or it could be said that an indescribable vibration suddenly appeared in the void. The void itself meant that there was nothing, and the appearance of the vibration was obviously equivalent to adding something to the void, even if it was just a vibration. During this vibration, all the living beings in the myriad heavens and realms felt that the world they were in and the world they were in was shaking violently. In a trance, they suspected that the world they were in would completely collapse in the next moment. It would be completely destroyed. At this moment, all the false sages who had survived in the myriad heavens and realms rejoiced like never before. They were originally very interested in everything that happened in Luo Fan's world, but they were worried about how powerful Luo Fan and the others were. They were worried about their completely incomprehensible mentality, so they didn't come to the vicinity to observe and feel everything here. Originally, they felt regretful about all of this. But now, when such a thing happened, they realized how wise their previous decision was. They also understood how much trouble they had avoided. How could they not rejoice? Luo Fan didn't care about how the other false sages rejoiced. At this moment, his expression was extremely serious. His eyes directly reflected the battle that was happening outside the world. His net of karma collided with the huge palm, causing an astonishing vibration. At that moment, although it looked like a violent impact, but in reality, during this process, no matter if it was the net of karma or the palm, both of them had produced a myriad of profound, and miraculous changes. Such changes, they were endless, vividly displaying the power of a true sage, the principles of a true sage, and the changes of a true sage. Moreover, any change was above an ordinary true sage's mystical ability. At this moment, if any of the changes were against any ordinary true sage's mystical ability, the true sage's mystical ability would definitely be completely crushed by the changes. The tremors were constantly generated, lingering, and dissipating. In the blink of an eye, billions of worlds were born in the vibration, and they quickly completed the entire process from birth to development to the limit, and finally completely dying out. The endless worlds didn't pile up in one place. Instead, they spread out in all directions along with the vibration. At first glance, it showed that the moment the two collided, it was like a machine gun being fired. It began to launch the world and the world into the depths of the void. Sure enough, he has potential, one of the 6 desperateurs suddenly said. This desperateur was the one that Luo Fan chose at this time. It was the opponent of the net of karma. He was one of the 3 desperateurs who hadn't spoken before. He looked like a young man, but the light of wisdom in his eyes was more intense than any false sage that Luo Fan had ever seen. At this moment, the net of karma and the palm formed by light and heat seemed to have frozen. However, the vibrations were constantly being emitted from the point of contact between the two. Similarly, The world formed by the vibrations was also constantly being emitted during this process. They were both existences with the mysteries of a true sage. Although the two changed in different ways, their essence was the same. As they were locked in a stalemate, the potential of the two was constantly stimulated. The power of the net of karma and the power of the palm were constantly increasing in an astonishing way. The shock waves caused by the collisions became stronger and stronger, and the range of influence became wider and wider. It was the same for those worlds. Not only did they become denser, but they also lasted longer and longer after they were born. There was even a treasure light that seemed to suppress everything that came from the point of contact. Along with the terrifying tremors, it continuously spread into the depths of the void and gradually enveloped more and more worlds in the universe. At that moment, the palm that was originally descending towards the world could no longer carry out its original purpose. Naturally, he could no longer carry out his original goal. He was stuck in a deadlock with the net of karma in the void. However, apart from this palm, there were still 5 other palms. They completely ignored the one that was stopped. Their palms didn't stop and continued to press down on the world, as if they wanted to tear this world apart. At this moment, Hunguzi and the others finally made a move. Each of them let out a loud roar and continuously released true sage mystiques from their bodies, breaking through the barrier of the world. They charged toward the 5 palms. Fortunately, they were all false sages. At this time, they only needed a thought to complete the distribution of their targets. Therefore, it was very orderly, and there was no unequal distribution due to the haste. There was no delay at all. Hunguzi and the others knew how fragile their true sage mystiques were compared to the palm. Therefore, they did not think that just one true sage mystique would be able to stop any of the palms. Hence, at this moment, the true sage mystiques that they released were endless. No one knew how many true sage mystiques there were, but they formed a long river of true sage mystiques. It was as though a flood was crashing against a dam. They rushed towards the palm in a frenzy. They collided with the palm. Outside the world, the power of the true sage mystiques was not under any control or restriction. They were still 3, and when they appeared at the same time, it would create a vicious cycle. In the end, as it expanded infinitely, it would completely destroy the universe. If it was any other time, of course, Hunguzi and the others could not release the true sage mystiques like this. However, the situation was different this time. At this time, the opponents of these true sage mystiques were terrifying existences that were countless times stronger than them. Between the true sage mystiques, there was an absolutely powerful target. The long river of true sage mystiques, formed by the countless true sage mystiques, could barely withstand the palm. How could it have the extra power to create the vicious cycle and stimulate its power infinitely to finally destroy the universe? It was only at this time that Hunguzi and the others could use the true sage mystiques without any scruples. The number of true sage mystiques in the long river of true sage mystiques was almost endless. The terrifying attack and destructive power they produced were truly beyond imagination. However, such a terrifying power was clearly not much of a threat to that palm. As the palm vibrated slightly, it easily shattered the true sage mystiques, causing the mysteries that formed the true sage mystiques to collapse and disappear. From afar, it looked like the palm was like the firmest dam in the universe. It directly blocked the long river of true sage mystiques, causing the long river of true sage mystiques to completely shatter after colliding with it. The fragments of true sage mystiques that flew in all directions looked like drops of water. However, even though the difference was so great, the number of true sage mystiques in the long river of true sage mystiques was unbelievable. Even if each true sage mystique could only cause a slight delay, the entire long river of true sage mystiques was enough to completely block the palm. Therefore, at this time, the 6 palms were completely frozen outside the world. Although they had already made a grabbing and tearing posture, they could not actually make a move. If it was in the past, It would have been absolutely impossible for Hun Guzi and the others to release true sage mystiques at such an unimaginable speed. Being able to release true sage mystiques with the body of a false sage was already the limit of a false sage. How could it be possible for them to release true sage mystiques in units of billions like scattering sand? The reason why they were able to do this was because they had already become false saints who relied on true saint-level, profound mysteries. This was because they were relying on true sage-level mysteries, so their control of true sage remarkable powers had been greatly improved. Furthermore, they were supported by the heaven and earth almost without any reserve. In this way, not only was it difficult for them to release true sage mystiques, but the consumption was also much smaller than usual. This was the main reason why the long river of true sage mystiques had appeared. In other words, although it seemed like they were releasing true sage mystiques themselves, the world was actually using them to release the many true sage mystiques. Do you think you can block it just like that? A desperator said. This desperator was not the one who fought against Luo Fan, but a desperator whose palm was blocked by the long river of true sage mystiques. After he said that, another palm condensed from light and heat reached out from the vast thousand domains that he was in and quickly reached towards the world. That's cheating, suddenly. Suddenly, another desperator said. As he spoke, another palm formed from light and heat reached out from another vast thousand domains. However, this palm formed from light and heat did not reach towards the world that Luo Fan and the others were in. Instead, it reached towards the palm that had just appeared. There was a soft poof. The two palms came into contact with each other. In an instant, the instant that the karma net that was not inferior to Luo Fan's came into contact with the palm, a vibration and a treasure light appeared at the same time. This vibration did not strengthen the vibration caused by the contact between the karma net and the other palm. Instead, there was a strange counteraction effect between the two, causing the terrifying vibration that existed previously to weaken by quite a bit. It was so much so that even the boundless heavens and earth that were formed by the vibrations had been shattered by the new vibrations. In the blink of an eye, everything had disappeared. Only some light shadows were left trying to condense into a world. However, before they could condense, they were shattered by another vibration and disappeared completely. What's the point? The desperator who had used both of his palms first sighed. What's the difference between two hands and one hand? Isn't the result the same if you use both hands? Rules are rules. Since there's a dispute where one hand snatches the weight of the world to determine the final division, of course, one hand can only be used. The desperator who stopped them said faintly, "That's right." The other desperators said at the same time. Perhaps some of them did not think so. However, since someone objected, they could only object as well. They all had the same level of power. If someone wanted to cause trouble, they would be able to kill them. If someone wanted to cause trouble, no matter how many of them there were, it would be difficult to change the result. In this case, they might as well object. Their conversation was not noticed by Hun Guzi and the others. However, it was clearly heard by Luo Fan. For a moment, he couldn't help but come to a realization. He understood why they directly attacked this world together after discussing how to divide the spoils. He finally understood why they had agreed on how to split the spoils, but then decided to act together to deal with this world. It turned out that they were using the method of seizing the world to divide the spoils. The desperator who wanted to use both hands to get the result faster still refused to give up. He said, "Now that we're blocked, this hand is equivalent to having no effect. Using the other hand to attack is equivalent to using only one hand, but it's also in line with the rules." Hearing this, the other desperators only smiled faintly and said, "To deal with these fake saints, we actually need to cripple one hand." These words finally made the despair man speechless. Therefore, he paused for a moment and could only shake his head and sigh. Then, he raised his hand and waved lightly. The palm formed by light and heat, which was the second palm, shook and broke away from the other palm. In the blink of an eye, it had already retracted and returned to the vast thousand world. This posture was much easier and smoother than when Luo Fan retracted the karma net. At the same time, the desperator who had stopped him also withdrew the light and heat effortlessly in a manner that was not inferior to his. He retracted the palm. Seeing this, Luo Fan had a feeling that it was beyond his expectations, but he also felt that it was reasonable. What was unexpected was that those palms were obviously similar to the true divine theurgy and were many times more powerful than ordinary true divine theurgy. However, they were able to retract it so easily. This was obviously not in line with the means of a fake saint. Chapter 1532. After the palm retracted, the situation was in a stalemate. In that world, Hun Guzi and the others gathered countless true saint innate abilities to form a long river of divine ability and blasted it crazily towards the 5 palms. They used quantity to exchange for quality, forcefully blocking the palm that was many times more powerful than ordinary true saint innate abilities. On the other side, Luo Fan had unleashed the power of the karma net as much as possible. Although it seemed that he was only resisting the palm, the true sage level means in the karma net surged out endlessly. At every moment, there were trillions of changes that surpassed the limits of a false sage. Because of the incomparably powerful opponent, the potential of the net of karma, which had already been developed by Luo Fan to the limit of what he could achieve, began to be triggered once again. The might of the karma net itself grew stronger and stronger as this process continued. Its transformation also grew more and more mysterious, more and more inconceivable. However, the power of the palm was much stronger than the karma net. At that moment, even though the karmic web was barely able to withstand the palm, it was still rather arduous. Furthermore, it was gradually sinking. As time passed, the karma net gradually retreated, but the palm gradually moved forward. If this situation continued, it could be predicted that one day, the palm formed by light and heat would definitely break through Luo Fan's defense. It would directly come into contact with the world where he was now. However, it wasn't just Luo Fan's karma net that was constantly being pushed back by the powerful palm. The other 10 divine ability rivers were also being pushed back by their own palms. Moreover, the speed at which they retreated was even faster than the speed at which Luo Fan's karma net retreated. Although the difference wasn't too big, speed was still speed. I thought I had the upper hand, but I didn't expect that I would suffer a loss. At this moment, Luo Fan's eyes shone. The expression of the desperation expert who was fighting him turned ugly at this moment. "Little guy, why don't we negotiate?" Suddenly, the desperation expert said to Luo Fan, "Negotiate? Could it be that this senior wants me to take the initiative, to give up?" Luo Fan asked curiously. "Of course that's for the best. However, even if I wanted this, the others wouldn't agree to it. I can only helplessly give up." The despair one laughed. "Then what does senior plan to do?" Luo Fan became even more curious. The despair one said, "Why don't we change the way we fight? If this stalemate continued, it would probably take many years before there would be a result. This is a form of torture for both of us. Why don't we decide the outcome of the battle with a single move? This way, we can end the battle quickly. It'll be beneficial for both of us." "End the battle quickly?" Luo Fan laughed. "Senior, why do you have to trick me? How could a quick battle benefit both of us? That's only good for senior. To me, that's a completely foolish choice." "How could that be?" "That way, you won't have to suffer anymore." The desperate laughed. "I'm not as good as you, senior. I know that. If he ended the battle quickly, the result would be my defeat and senior's victory. Wouldn't that be courting death?" Luo Fan said with a smile. "You have to have confidence in yourself." The despair one said. Luo Fan just shook his head. "Of course I have confidence in myself. That's why I plan to drag it out for a while. Who knows, I might be able to comprehend something and defeat senior." "You're too confident." The despair one laughed. He knew that words would not be able to sway Luo Fan. He didn't speak anymore. "Seniors, what exactly is your goal?" Seeing that he didn't say anything else, he asked. Luo Fan asked. "I can't say for now, but you will find out soon," the desperator said at this time. Luo Fan stood there and sighed inwardly. Although Huang Xiaolong had a vague guess as to the purpose of these despair warriors, he felt that they were here for Han Guzi and the others, for the true saint rank esoteric or something related to a true saint, but he couldn't be completely sure. At this time, he wanted to know their true purpose from the despair ones, but he didn't expect them to be so secretive. They were still unwilling to give in even at this time. After Luo Fan and the despair ones stopped talking, the area fell into a rare silence. Time passed slowly. The 6 despair ones didn't use any other means. They just relied on the 6 palms condensed from light and heat that were many times more powerful than the true divine theurgy to slowly suppress the various defensive means that Luo Fan, Han Guzi, and the others had used. After a few years, the 6 palms had already reached the vicinity of the world. Whether it was Han Guzi's Theurgy River or Luo Fan's Karma Web, they were all suppressed outside the world and were about to come into contact with the world. If the palms really came into contact with the world, it was obvious that the world would be torn apart in an instant and the entire world would turn into countless fragments. At this time, there was a flash in the void and a strong, true divine level aura rushed over, causing Luo Fan, Han Guzi, and the others' expressions to change slightly. It even made the despair ones frown slightly. Amidst this change, dozens of false saints appeared in the void outside this world. These false sages were none other than the many true sages who had competed with Han Guzi and the others to prove their Tao and become false sages with the true divine level mysteries. In the end, they had failed and were directly sent to the depths of the void. At this moment, after so many years, the disciples of the true sage had finally returned to this place. At this moment, they saw everything that was happening in this region of nothingness. Their expressions became extremely ugly. I didn't expect there to be such powerful existences hidden in the universe. It seems like we've really been frogs at the bottom of a well, Jin Chanzi said among the false sages. Although they were the losers, what they wanted the most, the chance to prove their Tao and become sages with the true divine level mysteries, had disappeared. However, this didn't mean that they didn't care about this powerful world anymore. It was the opposite. That world was still an extremely precious existence to them. However, they could still obtain great benefits from that world. They could prove their Tao and become sages in that powerful world and comprehend more true divine level mysteries. Thus, it was possible for their cultivation to once again obtain a huge increase in their cultivation realm. In this way, they could not just watch as this world was destroyed. Of course, they couldn't just watch as it was destroyed. At this moment, the actions of those desperators had obviously touched their reverse scale. This made each of them have a strong desire to destroy. They actually dare to come again. The desperator who was facing off against Luo Fan said with a frown, in the bet that the desperators had set previously, because he was chosen by Luo Fan, the palm he sent out went against Luo Fan's Karma Web. Among the 6 palms, he encountered the greatest difficulty. At this moment, he was already far behind the other 5. This had obviously made him quite annoyed. Just as he was about to find something to vent his anger, Jin Chanzi and the others appeared and stood there. Naturally, he was the first to respond. Why wouldn't we dare to come? Since we're the disciples of the sages, we naturally need to have a fearless heart, Jin Chanzi said lightly. Disciples of the sages. We used to be the disciples of the sages too. The desperator suddenly laughed. Used to be the disciples of the sages too. Jin Chanzi and the others heard this. They couldn't help but be shocked. Being the disciple of the sages was an extremely noble status. Once one was the disciple of the sages, one would be the disciple of the sages forever. If one was the disciple of the sages, it would expire. They, who had left the main world of the Earth universe billions of years ago and came to the myriad heavens and realms, were no longer the disciples of the sages. However, even though they were already powerful false sages now, they were still proud of being the disciples of the sages. They still didn't think that they were no longer the disciples of the sages. Under such circumstances, suddenly hearing someone say that they were once the disciples of the sages was a blasphemy to the identity of being the disciples of the sages. However, They were all stunned by what they saw. After being stunned for a while, an indescribable anger instantly filled all of their hearts. How dare you abandon this identity so casually? What do you think the sages are? A false sage said in an unprecedentedly cold and angry voice. Ha! The despair suddenly laughed out loud. This laughter kept coming from the major kiliacosm, where he was, rushing towards the void and the myriad heavens and realms. It formed circles of strange ripples, producing all kinds of unimaginable light and shadows that spread in all directions. There seemed to be joy in the laughter, pain, and even the deepest despair. Hearing this laughter, the expressions of the false sages changed slightly. To be able to laugh like this, not only was he powerful, but the emotions hidden in his heart definitely surpassed everything. They couldn't help but start to ponder exactly what had happened to cause this person to laugh like that. The laughter of the despairing man continued for a long time before it gradually stopped. After stopping, he said to the false sages with a smile on his face, "Looking at you guys, it's as if I'm looking at my past self. Thank you for letting me recall that period of time in the past. In order to express my gratitude to you, I'll give you eternal peace." As soon as he finished speaking, a ray of light rushed out from the major kiliacosm. With a method that surpassed time and space and everything, it arrived in front of the dozens of false sages in a flash. That's right. Although it was just a small ray of light, it appeared in front of the dozens of false sages at the same time. Moreover, this contradiction was not disharmonious at all. From the looks of it, this ray of light was still the same, and it still looked the same. There was no change at all. Even the false sages could not help but be shocked when they saw this mysterious change. Oh no! Golden Monk and the others were horrified at the same time. Instinctively, their respective true sage mystical abilities instantly rushed out from their bodies, directly blocking in front of them and facing the light. At this moment, how could they still care about what kind of vicious cycle would occur when the true sage mystical abilities appeared so densely and caused the myriad heavens and realms to be completely destroyed? All they could think about was blocking this ray of light in front of them that they could not sense any aura at all, but it was obviously mysterious beyond their understanding. Although that ray of light did not emit any aura, there was no doubt that it was powerful in nature. The true sage mystical abilities that Golden Monk and the others had used had the power to kill all false sages and destroy the myriad heavens and realms. However, in the face of this ray of light without any aura, they actually had no ability to resist at all. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. The true sage mystical abilities collapsed one after another. Even though during this process, every true sage mystical ability had unleashed its potential to the limit and unleashed an infinite true sage level attack power, it still could not block this seemingly ordinary light. Moreover, the destruction of these dozens of true sage mystical abilities happened at the same time. It felt as if the world in the light was different from the world in the false sage's perception. The many false sages seemed to be scattered everywhere, but in the light, they seemed to be overlapping. All the true sage mystical abilities seemed to be overlapping as well. This scene instantly caused the hearts of Jean Chanzi and the others to fill with indescribable despair. Stop! A faint voice came from the depths of the void. Immediately after, a strange finger blocked in front of the ray of light. This finger also had the characteristics of the light emitted by the Desperateur. Similarly, it looked ordinary. But it was clearly a finger that could block all the light at the same time. Moreover, there was no awkwardness in the process. Everything seemed so natural with his fingers, with his soft poof. The light collided with the finger. In an instant, the two trembled slightly at the same time. Endless treasure light seemed to explode in an instant, sweeping through the myriad heavens and realms in a flash. It swept through all the worlds in the myriad heavens and realms. Even the eyes of all living beings were filled with it. However, very soon, before almost all living beings could react, the light had already disappeared. During this process, Even the false sages only felt a slight blur in front of their eyes. They could not see the treasure light at all. The moment the light appeared, the finger and the light disappeared without a trace at the same time, as if they had never appeared. "Hoa, do you want to join in too?" The desperateur, who had lost his composure and laughed, said faintly. "I'm not interested in joining in. It's just that I can't bear to see these existences that are considered our junior brothers and sisters die just like that," the voice said faintly. At the same time, somewhere in the depths of the void, a great thousand world was reflected in the eyes of the desperators. It was also reflected in the eyes of Luo Fan, who was inside that world. "There's another one." Luo Fan smiled bitterly at this moment. This existence that appeared later was obviously also a desperateur. At least, it was an existence that was at the same level as these desperators. Just now, there were only 6 of such existences, but they had already forced them to this step. Now that they were about to be completely annihilated, he did not expect that another existence of the same level would appear. How could he not feel helpless? However, he suddenly had some expectations. However, it seems that this so-called Ho won't sit back and watch Hanguzi and the others die. This might be a good thing. You can actually see me. It seems that you're the protagonist of this world calamity. Suddenly, the desperateur in the Great Thousand World seemed to have sensed Luo Fan's gaze and suddenly laughed. Then, Luo Fan felt that the originally complete vast thousand domains had opened up in the blink of an eye, and everything inside began to appear in his eyes, big and small. Of course, this opening didn't mean that the Great Thousand World had really split apart. It was just that the existence that was blocking his sight had opened up, allowing him to observe all kinds of things in that world. Among them, there was a boy who seemed to be only 5 or 6 years old, standing in the extremely narrow Great Thousand World. His eyes seemed to directly reflect Luo Fan's figure. This person's cultivation level is much stronger than the 6 of them. He is stronger than the 6 of them. Seeing this person clearly, Luo Fan instantly made a judgment in his heart. The basis of his judgment was none other than the size of the Great Thousand World. The stability of the space inside the Great Thousand World, the instantaneous stability, and the number of true sage-level mysteries contained in the Great Tao of the Great Thousand World. At this moment, the area of the Great Thousand World was nearly half of the Great Thousand World that the 6 desperators had imagined. In other aspects, it was much stronger than the 6 of them. All of this was enough for him to guess. The boy, who seemed to be only 5 or 6 years old, had a stronger cultivation. The protagonist of this world calamity. Luo Fan smiled bitterly at this time. He didn't care whether he was the protagonist or not. But now it seemed that even if he was originally the protagonist, he was now suppressed to the limit and almost couldn't control himself. Perhaps he would soon lose his life here, although it was only a doppelganger projection. But it was also quite depressing to lose it. As the protagonist, I can give you a chance. The boy suddenly laughed. Luo Fan was slightly stunned when he heard that. What chance? A chance to fulfill your destiny. The boy laughed. Destiny? I don't like destiny. Luo Fan instinctively rejected this word and frowned. Oh, if you don't like destiny, then use luck Tao. Anyway, it's the same meaning. The boy said indifferently. Luo Fan's expression didn't change at all when he heard that. He was too lazy to open his mouth to refute this. The river of luck Tao had several levels. Even a true sage could only break through the level of an ordinary cultivator. But it was still controlled by a deeper level of the river of luck Tao. Under such circumstances, although Luo Fan was confident and ambitious, he had never thought that he would be able to completely cut off the connection with the river of luck Tao and get rid of the river of luck Tao's control. Therefore, even if he hated the words destiny and luck Tao, he couldn't deny that they really existed. However, he couldn't deny that it truly existed, and that it possessed supreme power that was faintly affecting him. Fulfill destiny. What do you mean? He paused for a while and asked. Of course, it means to become a despera. The boy laughed. Luo Fan was taken aback. What was going on? When he was being attacked by other desperators and was almost out of breath, there was suddenly a desperator who said that he would be given a chance to become a desperateur. This didn't make sense no matter how he looked at it. I don't understand. Luo Fan frowned and said, "Perhaps you can understand that because I have been in despair for too long, there is already a psychological problem. Therefore, I want others to enjoy this kind of despair. If you think of it this way, perhaps you can understand." The 5 or 6-year-old boy laughed and said, This made Luo Fan couldn't help but feel an inexplicable sense of helplessness in his heart. The boy waited for a while and found that Luo Fan didn't speak. So he laughed and said, "It seems that you want to accept this opportunity. Of course I accept. Perhaps despair is hard to bear. But if I can't even feel the despair that I should feel, then it's too sad." Luo Fan let out a long breath and said, "Good. Not a bad mentality. I only hope that you can still maintain this mentality after you understand it," the boy praised. However, the inexplicable smile on his face made people feel a chill in their hearts. While the boy and Luo Fan were talking, Jin Chanzi, Hun Guzi, and the other false sages couldn't hear their conversation at all. From their point of view, they could only see Luo Fan's mouth opening and closing slightly, as if he was saying something. If they wanted to hear clearly what he was trying to say, or even if they wanted to distinguish what he was saying from the way his lips opened and closed, it was simply impossible. It was as if there was some power beyond their understanding that was isolating their understanding and confusing their senses. It seemed so mystical, so inconceivable. The reason for this was very simple. It was just like how those desperators had clearly appeared there before, but these false sages still didn't see them. It was because of the superiority of the desperators themselves. In other words, at this moment, the words that Luo Fan said and the voice that he heard were all transmitted through the essence of the desperators. Chapter 1533. The moment Luo Fan agreed, some kind of inexplicable wave swept across the void. This inexplicable fluctuation was so wonderful, yet so incredible. In the blink of an eye, it swept across countless worlds and heavens. At this moment, the area where Luo Fan was located was also within the range of influence of this fluctuation. Whether it was the great 1,000 worlds of the despair, the palm of light and heat they displayed, the barrier of this world, or the river of supernatural powers created by Han Guzi and the others, none of them were able to affect this fluctuation at all. It felt as if they were in a completely different dimension from this kind of fluctuation. Mind your own business. One of the desperators sighed. In this wave, Luo Fan faintly felt a sense of familiarity, but also strangeness. It was as if he had clearly felt it before, but it was also as if he had never felt it before. What the hell is this? Luo Fan was shocked, and this thought flashed through his mind. His thoughts were extremely fast, and countless thoughts flashed through his mind in an instant. Amidst these countless thoughts, a bolt of lightning suddenly flashed, illuminating all of his emotions, illuminating all of his doubts. "I see." Suddenly, a shocked expression appeared on Luo Fan's face. However, he had already remembered what this fluctuation was. He remembered why he had such a strange feeling of familiarity and strangeness towards this wave. This wave was similar to the wave that he had encountered in the world that he had opened up. It was the wave that enveloped the entire world when the great calamity descended. Of course, it was only a similar feeling, but not the same kind of wave. It was precisely because of this similar but not completely identical state. Just now, it gave him this familiar yet strange feeling. "Looks like you seem to understand what this is?" The childlike desperator, who was also Hohua, discovered Luo Fan's abnormal expression and couldn't help but be curious. This should be the root of this world calamity, right? Luo Fan said with a somewhat disappointed expression. "You actually found out?" At this moment, Hohua wasn't the only one who spoke. Another despair one spoke at the same time. In addition to the despair man who spoke, the other despair men's faces also changed slightly. Obviously, for Luo Fan to be able to answer this question, it was already far beyond their expectations. It could even be said that it had already made them feel extremely shocked. "You really aren't simple." Hohua looked at Luo Fan. There was a faint smile on his face. At this time, Luo Fan did not care about their expressions. Instead, he carefully sensed this inexplicable fluctuation. If it was the great tribulation of heaven and earth, this kind of fluctuation was only an extremely insignificant fluctuation in the entire great tribulation of the world. To the great tribulation of heaven and earth, the most important thing was the evil aura that descended from the chaos, which could change the minds of all living beings and change the minds of all living beings. Luo Fan had paid more attention to the murderous aura during the previous great tribulations. It was just an insignificant fluctuation. However, he did not pay much attention to it. Because of this, although he had encountered stronger fluctuations many times, he still did not have much understanding of these fluctuations. What was the use of these fluctuations? What kind of power did they have? How would they affect him in the end? These types were all mysteries to him. Now that he had personally encountered these fluctuations, he obviously had no choice but to focus on these fluctuations. He tried his best to understand these fluctuations and find all the secrets of these fluctuations. "There's no need to look," Ho was said with a smile. Luo Fan frowned. How could he not look? Putting aside false saints, any ordinary cultivator would definitely pay a lot of attention to something that they could not understand when they encountered something that they could not understand, especially something that was targeted at them and that they could not understand. They would want to understand it completely. How could he give up on understanding the fluctuations that were about to be used against him at this time? Luo Fan stood there with a faint expression on his face. Ho's appearance was reflected in his eyes again. These fluctuations are the domain of a true sage. Unless you become a true sage, you won't be able to understand any of the mysteries within, even if you become a despair one, Ho was said with a smile. Since even a despair one can't understand any of the mysteries within, how did you control it and summon this fluctuation? Luo Fan frowned. I didn't control this fluctuation, nor did I summon this fluctuation. Ho shook his head and said, because this fluctuation has always been here. The reason why you couldn't feel it before, but can feel it now, is because I used some special methods to allow you to temporarily have my senses. Your senses? Luo Fan was shocked. He could naturally understand what was being said, but he found it a little hard to accept the content of the speech. At this time, he didn't feel that his senses were affected at all. He didn't feel any power. In fact, he didn't even feel anything affecting his senses. Under such circumstances, the despair one actually said that he had temporarily gained his senses. This situation was of course like a bolt from the blue to him, and he naturally found it hard to accept. Why? You don't believe me? Hoa laughed. As he spoke, he didn't seem to do anything, but Luo Fan suddenly felt that the inexplicable fluctuation that he felt familiar and unfamiliar had suddenly disappeared into thin air, as if it had never appeared. During this process, he still didn't feel any changes in his senses. Everything about him was still exactly the same as before. There was still no difference compared to before. There was no change at all. This situation made him even more shocked. At this moment, he once again felt the presence of that fluctuation. It was as if that fluctuation had always existed here. How is it? Do you believe me now? Ho was said. The facts were already in front of him. At this time, even if Luo Fan was unwilling to admit it, he could only accept that the despair one really controlled his senses when he couldn't feel it at all. It allowed his senses to perceive everything that the other party wanted him to perceive. It could also shield his senses so that he couldn't perceive anything that the other party didn't want him to perceive. This fact was obviously an indescribable grievance for him. For a moment, Luo Fan's expression became extremely ugly. How did you do it? Don't tell me you think that the ability of the despair one is only what you see? Hoa laughed. Hearing this, Luo Fan's heart shook. Could it be that the true strength of the despair one is actually that strong? Even a false sage can only be crushed by him. Impossible, right? However, looking at what the 6 despair ones were doing at this time, they were casually condensing light and heat to form a palm. It was already so oppressive that Luo Fan's karma and net couldn't bear it. It also made Hungu Zi and the others unable to block the true sage's winding river with the support of heaven and earth. In this case, their own power might be even more terrifying. If a casual attack was already like this, how much stronger would it be if they really attacked seriously? Okay, no need to talk nonsense. Next, you can experience it carefully. Ho was no longer in the mood to talk anymore. After saying this faintly, Luo fans suddenly felt that the surrounding fluctuation suddenly became many times stronger. Amidst these fluctuations, he could feel his mind and all of his senses. He felt everything about himself. They sank into the fluctuation. At this moment, his will transcended time and space. His mind entered an incomparably wondrous state. In this state, time and space no longer had any meaning. Where is this? He looked around and murmured. At this moment, he felt that he had entered a completely unfamiliar place. This place was surrounded by a gray haze. An indescribable pressure constantly squeezed him, making it extremely difficult for him to breathe. His whole body felt like it would completely collapse and be destroyed in the next moment. This is the source of despair. A voice entered Luo Fan's ears at this time. Then, a figure that looked like a 5 or 6-year-old boy appeared beside Luo Fan. This was obviously Ho Hua. The source of despair? Is it because of this that you're in despair? Luo Fan frowned. You're very smart. Ho Hua praised. Then what is this place? Why does it make you feel despair? Moreover, do you think that this place will also make me feel despair? Luo Fan asked with a frown. Ha! Ho Hua suddenly laughed loudly. An inexplicable sense of foreboding suddenly surged in Luo Fan's heart. He faintly felt that something was not right. After a while, Ho Hua finally stopped laughing and said, That's the mentality. Your performance is too perfect. Luo Fan frowned, but did not say anything. Only by destroying the hope in your heart with this mentality will my efforts not be in vain. Ho Hua said excitedly and satisfactorily. Hearing this, Luo Fan felt even worse. This is the origin of the realm. Ho Hua chuckled. The origin of the realm? What's that? Luo Fan frowned deeply and asked. The origin of the realm is not a place that actually exists, nor is it something that actually exists. It is just the appearance of a kind of realm that is materialized. It is also an existence that can be sensed by false sage-level existences after their senses are enhanced to a certain level. Perhaps you've already guessed it. That's right, this vast and boundless origin of the realm represents all the origins that a false sage needs to master if he wants to become a true sage. Ho Hua laughed loudly. That laughter contained unimaginable despair. This kind of despair penetrated deep into the bone marrow and was so thick that it almost condensed into a substance. Luo Fan was already stunned at this moment. Through Ho Hua's explanation, he had already clearly felt that in the boundless grayness in front of him, every trace and every wisp, they all represented a kind of extreme profoundness. Extremely profound profoundness. This kind of profoundness was so obscure and ordinary that at first glance, one would not even think that it was a profoundness. However, as long as one took a closer look, they would discover that those profoundness were all kinds of true sage-level profoundness. This kind of profoundness was complicated and profound. It was far beyond the scope that a false sage could understand. At least, it was within the scope that he could understand in a short period of time. If he wanted to master any one of these profoundness, he would probably have to spend hundreds of millions of years to do so. And in front of Luo Fan, in this endless dusk, even a palm-sized piece of it would not be able to survive. There were probably thousands of true sage-level profoundness in it, and he actually had to master this endless grayness in front of him in order to become a true sage. This was probably something that could only be achieved by surpassing the limits of numbers. This was enough to make anyone despair. How is this possible? Luo Fan muttered. He lifted his foot and took a step forward. The pressure that the surrounding grayness gave him was so strong that it was as if tens of thousands of worlds were pressing down on him at the same time. If he was not a genuine false sage and was using the heavenly cauldron of the divine court as his body, He would not be able to move under such pressure. It was impossible. Under such pressure, one could imagine how difficult it would be for him to move forward. At this moment, although he was already advancing with a method that could normally cross hundreds of millions of light years with a step, in the end, he was still like a snail. He only moved less than a meter after taking hundreds of steps. There's no need to waste your effort. Without comprehending that realm's origin, it's impossible for you to move to that position as you please, Ho was said at this moment. Hearing this, Luo Fan stood there in a daze. An indescribable despair appeared on his face. Ha! That's right. That's the expression. I like to see this expression. Ho laughed loudly. Hearing this, Luo Fan came back to his senses. He gritted his teeth and said, I don't believe it. If that's the case, how can there be sages in this world? You don't know this. Those sages, every one of their achievements were achieved by chance and coincidence. Even they themselves can't clearly describe what happened in the process of becoming sages. Moreover, none of them need to go through the stages of false sage and false sage. They're only quasi-sages, and unknowingly, they're already true sages. In fact, I remember that there was a true sage who didn't even reach the quasi-sage level, but directly became a Khanate Grand Luo. He jumped a true sage in one jump. Ho smiled, but there was a hint of madness in his eyes. This madness was hidden very deeply, but it was so strong that it could burn everything. It was enough to destroy everything. How's that possible? Luo Fan murmured. That's how it is. Things in this world are just that unfair. Ho smiled. Are you in despair now? Ho smiled. Luo Fan's expression was blank, but he couldn't say anything. It's good that you're in despair. Since you're in despair, then you're a despairing person. From today onwards, you're one of us. Ho smiled, looking extremely happy. However, Luo Fan could feel a powerful desire to destroy the world repressing and brewing in his heart. It could erupt at any time and completely destroy everything. At this moment, Luo Fan suddenly felt the pressure on his body increase by a few hundred times. Under this pressure, he was forced out of the source of the realm, the source of despair. His eyes flashed, and the pressure disappeared. He found himself back in that world, back near Jing Yitzi. At the same time, he clearly felt some kind of mysterious and strange mystery leave his body. So, it's this mystery that controls my senses. In an instant, he understood and instantly knew what this mystery was used for. Of course, he only knew how this profound mystery worked. As for what kind of profound mystery it was, he still couldn't do it. Then, he felt the changes in his body. At this moment, the many mysteries of the true divine theurgy became so clear in his eyes. In a trance, he almost felt that the true divine theurgy was actually similar to the false divine theurgy, as if it was already within the scope of his complete control. He gently raised his hand, and a net of karma appeared on his finger. It began to change crazily. It evolved crazily, and its power began to increase endlessly. In a short span of a few breaths, it had already risen to the level of the super net of karma that was blocking the palm in front of him right now. The whole process was not forced at all. It was straightforward and unimaginably smooth. However, the power of the net of karma was not limited to this level. It began to continue to grow and evolve. Vaguely, it actually gradually changed into a gray appearance. In a trance, it seemed to have the same grayish realm origin that he had seen not long ago. The gray color on the net of karma became more and more. There were more and more true divine level mysteries in it. In the end, after reaching a certain level, the net of karma suddenly collapsed. Incomparably powerful energy surged in all directions, directly causing a hole that went deep into the great Tao to collapse in the heaven and earth, which originally did not suffer any real damage during the battle between the true sages. The strong destructive wave instantly attracted everyone's attention, causing an indescribable look of horror to appear on Jing Yitzi's face. Previously, in the process of Luo Fan and Ho's conversation, although Jing Yitzi was not far away from Luo Fan, because the way they talked was extremely mysterious, He had no idea what they were talking about. At that time, he was already bewildered. He felt extremely bad. Then he realized that Luo Fan and a certain someone had stopped talking for a while and stood there in a daze for a while. Then he realized that Luo Fan had suddenly released his true divine theurgy. Moreover, the true divine theurgy's power increased at an unimaginable speed until it could easily destroy him. Then it suddenly collapsed, causing the world to explode. This caused the uneasiness in his heart to soar to the limit. Finally, he did not dare to stay by Luo Fan's side any longer. His body retreated far away. After retreating, Jing Yixi's face turned cold, and he said, "I didn't expect Dao's friend to have such a deep secret." At this moment, Luo Fan naturally heard his voice, but he did not have the time to care about him. He only had this thought in his mind. As expected, I'm still far from being able to do it. The sudden collapse of the karma web was indeed out of his expectations. However, after thinking about it for a while, he understood why it was like this. After being guided into the origin source by Hohua, although he could no longer enter it like before, he could already feel the existence of the origin source at any time. He could also clearly see the endless mysteries of the true divine realm hidden in the origin source. This was actually like looking at a small flaw on a perfect object. When no one reminded you, it was extremely difficult to find the flaw. You might even need professional knowledge to find it. However, when you were reminded of the existence of the flaw, the first thing you noticed when you looked at the perfect object again would definitely be the flaw. At this moment, Luo Fan was like this. After seeing the origin source once, although Hohua no longer lent his senses to him, he could already notice the existence of the origin source, as if it was a flaw. It was precisely because he could notice the existence of the origin source that his senses had been enhanced by many times. At the same time, it was also because he saw the existence of the origin source that the true divine ability was no longer so unreachable in his eyes, and he could naturally control it more freely. Due to all these reasons, Luo Fan was able to discover the source of Hohua's control over his senses, and it was also the reason why he used an unimaginable method to activate the power of the karma web. As for why the karma web collapsed on its own, the reason was even more simple. Luo Fan was able to increase the power of the net of karma by stimulating it, by simulating the origin of his realm. Under such circumstances, when the stimulation exceeded the limits of the karma web could only collapse. After lamenting the limits of his ability, Luo Fan suddenly smiled. Although I'm still not strong enough, no matter what, I should be considered a hopeless person. Chapter 1534. At this moment, Luo Fan had already woken up from the despair he felt when he saw the origin of the realm. However, he already knew that he was almost dragged into the gutter by Hohua. That's right. The origin of the realm was indeed so vast that it could make any false sage feel despair. However, this should not include Luo Fan. For other false sages, if they wanted to become true sages, the only way they could choose was to completely master all the mysteries of true sages in the origin of the realm and comprehend all the principles contained within. In the end, they would be able to undergo a transformation in their own nature, turning the false into the true and becoming a true sage. However, for Luo Fan, the way to become a sage was not like that. This was because Luo Fan had an advantage over other false sages. That was because he had seen the real way to become a sage in the great Tianyuan world. So he had already understood the key to becoming a true sage. He understood the importance of sorting out his own unique worldview that was completely in line with his own temperament. Under such circumstances, if he wanted to become a sage, he did not need to force himself to master every bit of the mysteries of true sages to become a true sage. Instead, he only needed to raise his worldview to the level of a true sage. In other words, he would be able to perfectly explain everything in the perfect world, and even easily construct a perfect world with this worldview. He would already be able to exist freely in the state of chaos. By then, he would naturally become a true sage. In other words, no matter how vast the origin of the realm that he had seen before was, how could it hinder him from becoming a true sage? On the contrary, the more vast the origin of the realm was, the more mysteries of true sages he could comprehend from it. It would be able to raise the power of his Shantong to a higher level, which was a great thing. Just like now, although he had just been able to sense the existence of the origin of the realm through his senses, his strength had already improved tremendously at this moment. The 7 desperados that he had originally thought to be unfathomable and unfathomable to him were now able to see through their levels. It seems that a new desperation has been born. One of the 6 desperators who attacked the heaven and earth said, with a smile. Looking at him, he seemed to be gloating, and there was even an inexplicable madness in his expression. My name is Dao Shui. How should I address you, fellow Taoist? Another despair one asked with a smile. These people in despair didn't even bother to talk to the false sage under the true sage. They didn't even bother to know their names. Now that Luo Fan had become a person in despair, they instantly changed their attitude and treated him as their friend. Hearing this, Luo Fan composed himself and smiled. I am Luo Fan. Luo Fan. It seems like you really aren't a disciple of a true saint. No wonder I've never seen you before, Ho said. Next, the other 5 desperators also introduced themselves to Luo Fan at this time. The desperation warrior who was fighting against Luo Fan was called Qiangua, and the others were called Huang Fei, Wu Chuang, Qi Yi Sangyao. These names, obviously, they were changed after they became desperators, but they didn't have the characteristic of using Z as a title like those under the true sage. In this strange battlefield, the 2 sides seemed to have met by chance in a cave residence and introduced themselves to each other. It was impossible to tell that they were still enemies at this moment. They couldn't tell that the world where Luo Fan was would be completely torn apart by those desperators at any time. Now that fellow Taoist is a desperator. Do you know our purpose? Qiangua, who was fighting against Luo Fan, said with a smile. Hearing this, Luo Fan's heart skipped a beat. All kinds of thoughts flashed through his mind. In a trance, he already knew what they were thinking. For a moment, he couldn't help but feel a little confused. Could it be that fellow Taoists are planning to use the characteristic of Han Guzi and the others to become false sages with true sage-level mysteries as a catalyst to strengthen their understanding of the origin of the realm? Luo Fan guessed. I didn't expect you to really think of it. Qiangua laughed. You've just become a desperator, but you actually thought of the plan that we've been planning for tens of thousands of years. You're really born to be a desperator. Hearing this, Luo Fan couldn't help but smile bitterly. These words seemed to be good words, but why did it sound so awkward to him? However, it's also very difficult to succeed. Hun Guzi and the others only relied on that little bit of true sage-level mysteries to become false sages. Compared to the true sage-level mysteries in the origin of the realm, it's simply insignificant. How is it useful at all? Luo Fan frowned. You don't know this. Another desperator, Qi Yi, laughed at this moment and said, what we want is not the true sage-level mysteries themselves, but the process of how these true sage-level mysteries appear. Hearing this, Luo Fan came to a sudden realization and instantly understood what they were thinking. It turned out that what these desperators valued was the false sage-level mysteries, and how the mysteries that were not even false sage-level could finally become true sage-level mysteries through various combinations and transformations. One must know that the endless great Tao fragments that formed this world were all great Tao fragments that could only give birth to false sages. How could there be any true sage-level mysteries in such great Tao fragments? However, it was precisely the unbelievable number of great Tao fragments that did not have any true sage-level mysteries that were combined and evolved to give birth to this world that had true sage-level mysteries. That was obviously a state of turning the false into the real. To those who had lost all hope after understanding how difficult it was to become a true divine, this was of great value. Naturally, they would go after it like a flock of ducks. After understanding this, Luo Fan smiled bitterly. I see. Looks like fellow Qiangua was fooling me just now. At first glance, This guess seemed to be similar to his previous guess, but that was only at first glance. After careful analysis, one would know that the two were clearly polar opposites and were far apart from each other. Therefore, his guess could be said to be completely wrong. However, it was precisely such a wrong guess that Xiangua actually said that he had guessed correctly just now. If this wasn't fooling him, what was it? Xiangua laughed and said, "How can I be fooling you? I didn't say anything to say that you guessed correctly. I only said that you thought of it." This was completely a game of words. Luo Fan shook his head helplessly. He turned to look at Hun Guzi and the others and could not help but feel some pity for them. Since it's for that process, why didn't you guys make a move when this world was born? Why did you guys wait until Hun Guzi and the others became false sages with the true sage level mysteries? Luo Fan asked. It's very simple. Without the suppression of these false sages, these true sage mysteries will live and die with this world. If this world is destroyed and the great Tao is extracted, those true sage mysteries will disperse again and become false sage level mysteries, Ho said with a smile. Hearing this, Luo Fan came to a realization. The existence of false sages would form a suppressive effect on the world. This kind of suppression was enough to make the world become extremely stable, making the great Tao of this world become inseparable. An inseparable whole. This was not the will of the false sages, but their instincts. It was the effect of their subconscious. To the false sages, the integrity of the world had an intrinsic impact on their existence. In other words, it was related to their lives. Under such circumstances, maintaining the integrity of this world was equivalent to the survival instinct of these false sages. However, they did not need to control it. They did not need to think much because their nature would naturally complete this step. This was a fact that could not be reversed and changed. To these people in despair, what they needed was this kind of suppression. To comprehend how the false sage profound mysteries evolved into true sage profound mysteries, this was an extremely difficult process that required a lot of time and energy. Even these people in despair wanted to comprehend this. They also had to extract those true sage profound mysteries. They even had to extract the great Tao. In order to ensure that these true sage profound mysteries still existed after being extracted and did not degenerate, they needed the suppression of the false sages. After understanding this, Luo Fan knew that he could no longer stop these people in despair from dealing with Hun Guzi and the rest. Helpless, he could only say, "Fellow Taoists, can you guarantee their safety?" "I can't guarantee that." Qiangguo laughed. "Next, we have to extract the essence of their false sages and completely integrate it with the great Tao. Then, we will divide a part of it. Their lives, however, must be taken." Hearing this, Luo Fan could not help but frown. Although Qiangguo had directly rejected him, he knew that what he said was the truth. These people in despair were not one. There were also conflicts and frictions between them. Of course, it was impossible for them to be together for a long time. Since that was the case, and they were unwilling to give up on Hun Guzi and the rest, they naturally had to divide the great Tao. Naturally, they had to divide the true sage, profound mysteries. Once it was divided, in order to ensure the mysteries of the true sage after the division, and ensure that the great Tao after the division did not collapse or degenerate, the existence of these false sages was not enough. However, they also needed to completely integrate the essence of the false sages, so that the power of the essence of the false sages could suppress the various mysteries in the great Tao. Once they wanted to do that, the death of Hun Guzi and the rest would obviously be inevitable. "Then I'm sorry," Luo Fan sighed. With a thought, the karma net that was blocking Qiangguo's palm trembled slightly. Endless mysterious light was produced within it, and endless true sage, profound mysteries were displayed within it. In the blink of an eye, the power of the karma net increased by thousands of times. Originally, the karma net was about to be pushed back into the world by the palm. Now that its power had suddenly increased, it instantly counterattacked, causing the palm formed by light and heat to be slapped back. Moreover, because the power of the karma net had increased, The many true sage profound mysteries that the palm had evolved were unable to resist. Before the entire palm could react, it had already been crushed to pieces. Qiangua instantly withdrew from the battle, and the other people in despair were given the right to fight for this world. Are you going to protect them? Qiangua shouted furiously. After all, I already have some friendship with them. How can I bear to watch them be killed by you? Luo Fan sighed. As he spoke, he did not stop moving. As the karma net danced, it instantly caught the 5 palms that Hun Guzi and the rest had sent out. In the blink of an eye, the 5 palms were wrapped in the karma net. After that, the might of the net of karma erupted endlessly, and it instantly crushed the 5 palms, causing the light and heat that formed the 5 palms to collapse in an instant. In the blink of an eye, the 5 palms vanished into nothingness. Everything that happened in front of him happened very quickly, whether it was Hun Guzi or the rest. At that time, Jin Chanzi and the rest, who had just returned to help Hun Guzi and the rest resist the unknown attack, could not react for a moment. They did not know why things had suddenly developed in such a strange way. Jing Yitzi, who had been watching Luo Fan from nearby, was now staring blankly at Luo Fan. His eyes were filled with disbelief. Although Luo Fan was powerful, he was still within the scope of understanding of these true divine disciples. At least they clearly knew. What was the reason why Luo Fan was stronger than all of them? They knew in what aspect Luo Fan was stronger than them. However, at this time, this Luo Fan, who had not left at all and had not even sensed which aspect of his strength had suddenly increased by tens of thousands of times. How could he not feel incredulous? What the hell happened? Why did he suddenly become so powerful? This thought flashed across Jing Yitzi's mind. Vaguely, the originally clear figure in front of him seemed to have been shrouded by some kind of strange fog. It was as if he had been shrouded in some sort of strange fog, causing him to feel as if his senses were no longer sufficient at this time. Hun Guzi and the rest finally reacted. The winding river of true divine theurgy that they had sent out had stopped in an instant, causing the winding river to be cut off from its source. However, it was a pity that they had only cut off the source. The endless true divine, remarkable powers that they had sent out previously still existed and were still flying towards the karma web that was blocking their way and crushing the 5 terrifying palms. Right at this moment, after the karma net had crushed all the palms, with a turn, it had already wrapped around the 10 winding river of true divine theurgy. With a burst of power, the true divine theurgy was crushed one by one. This time, although it was a clash between the true divine god skills, there were no more layers of treasure lights that were revealed. During this process, there were only specks of light shining brightly like stars in the sky. The incomparably dense rays of light were like stars in the void, appearing so beautiful and so strange at the same time. The speed of the winding river of divine theurgy was extremely fast. All of them crashed into the net of karma and were instantly torn apart by the net of karma. They completely turned into specks of light and disappeared without a trace. How is it? Do you regret it now? At this time, Qiangwa said to Hohua, "Regret what? When I started taking action, I'm afraid you guys already guessed that this would happen. You guys didn't stop me, so why should I, who didn't participate in this matter, regret it?" Hohua chuckled at this time, and there was no trace of regret on his face. Although I guessed it, I'm still a little disappointed when it actually happened. Qian Yi sighed. The expressions of the other despair men changed slightly. Some of them seemed to be annoyed, and some seemed to be eager to try. At this time, Luo Fan's karma net had completely blocked all internal and external worries. Then, the net of karma shuddered slightly, and with a single sweep, it completely enveloped the entire world. However, at this time, the karma net no longer looked like a silk net. Instead, it looked like a mass of gray clouds. It wrapped the heaven and earth as if the heaven and earth were covered by clouds and mist. It seems like we still have to fight. At this time, a voice suddenly rang in Luo Fan's ears. This voice came from Qiangwa. He didn't know if it was an illusion, but from this voice, Luo Fan could hear that he seemed to be a little excited. However, no matter what the other party's mentality was, he had already expected to fight. At this time, he didn't change his expression because of this. In fact, he didn't even care about what Qiangguo would do. Instead, he turned his gaze to Han Guzi and the others and said, I can't hold these experts for long. Their target is your false divine theurgy. If you want to avoid being killed by them, the only way is to give up the false divine theurgy. However you choose, it's up to you. Hearing Luo Fan's words, Han Guzi and the others' expressions changed drastically. They want our false divine theurgy. They found it hard to believe. The existences that attacked them just now were so strong that they even felt as if they were facing their masters, who were true sages. Why would such existences be interested in ordinary false divine theurgy? No matter how they looked at it, it was as ridiculous as a billionaire being interested in a beggar's clothes and wanted to kill the beggar to take them away. They instinctively wanted to refute, but soon, they had already noticed the growth and change in Luo Fan's strength. For a moment, they couldn't refute. The weight of the speaker's words changed according to the speaker's strength. Luo Fan was much stronger than them. The weight of his words was already very strong. Now that his words had suddenly increased by tens of thousands of times, he could even easily deal with the attacks that they had to rely on the support of the world to barely be defeated. Naturally, the weight of his words had become even stronger. With such weight, they had to consider Luo Fan's suggestion. They began to think about whether they should do as he said and give up the false divine theurgy that they had just painstakingly obtained. This was the false divine theurgy in this world. Luo Fan didn't care what they thought. At this moment, he had already placed his attention on Qiangguo. Although he couldn't bear to see them die because of his friendship with Han Guzi and the others, so he wanted to help them block the pressure that they couldn't resist at all. But this didn't mean that he was really pedantic to the point of disregarding life and death. If it didn't threaten his life, he was naturally willing to block it for them. However, if the situation developed to a point where it threatened his life, he would definitely give up immediately. He would let them fend for themselves. In fact, he thought that he was already being extremely benevolent by helping them now. Just as Luo Fan took action and used his karma web to protect the world, Jin Shanzi and the others who were outside the world all understood. The matter here was no longer something that they could meddle in. Therefore, they looked at each other and made a prompt decision. They turned around and left without saying a word. They went straight into the depths of the void. Not long after, everyone had left, and the place returned to its original empty state. Let's do it, Luo Fan said to Qiangguo. After his senses were enhanced, when he looked at Qiangguo and the others who were in despair, he no longer needed to focus as much as before to be able to see them. Instead, he could easily see them with a glance. It was as if they were standing in front of him through the void, layers of time and space, and layers of heaven and earth. Even at this moment, he could still faintly see them. In addition to Ho Hua, Qiangguo, and the others, there were more than a dozen strange individuals that existed in his senses. However, it seemed that because those individuals did not pay attention to this place and did not want to participate in the matters here, Luo Fan could only see blurry shadows of them. It was as if they were completely shrouded in some kind of strange fog. No matter how hard he tried to look and observe, he couldn't see anything. He couldn't even see where they were or what they looked like. For these desperate people, this change in their individual senses made it seem as if Luo Fan was now in the same dimension as them, and they were no longer separated by some strange barrier like before. Of course, this also meant something else. That was, the number of despaired ones in the myriad heavens and realms was much more than expected. Moreover, there were a lot more of them. Those strange individuals were obviously despaired ones. Are you ready? Qiangguo had a faint smile on his face at this time. Chapter 1535. Helplessly, he could only nod and say, "Come on." With that, he did not wait for Qiangguo to make a move. Instead, he casually pointed his finger, and a strange palm directly stretched out from heaven and earth, grabbing the vast thousand world where Qiangguo was located. This palm was completely condensed by power. However, it did not simply contain power. What was faintly flowing in it was the incomparably rich, true divine occult. This true divine occult was taken from the karma net, and it faintly resonated with the true divine occult that he had seen in the origin of the realm. Its power was many times stronger than that of a true divine theurgy. In the face of this palm, Qiangua only smiled faintly. Then, from his vast thousand world, a ray of light rushed out, transformed in the void, and turned into a sharp blade, directly colliding with Luo Fan's palm. This sharp blade contained the aura of a true divine theurgy, which was stronger than any true divine theurgy that Luo Fan had ever felt before. It felt as if a true divine had personally taken action. This sharp blade surpassed time. As soon as it appeared, it had already come into contact with Luo Fan's energy palm. In an instant, layers of treasure light, which was enough to completely cover the entire heavens and myriad realms, began to erupt from the point of contact between the two. It directly swept through the heavens and myriad realms, enveloping all the worlds in the void, all the space-time, and all the heavens and earth. Faintly, there was even a feeling that the heavens and myriad realms were shaking slightly, as if they could not bear the shock caused by this impact. The true divine theurgy contained in the palm of Luo Fan was many times stronger than that of a true divine theurgy. Its power was even stronger than his karma net, not to mention the sharp blade of Qiangua. The terrifying power contained in it was even stronger than that of almost any true divine theurgy, including Luo Fan's karma net. When such two kinds of existences collided and produced an unreserved battle, the scene was shocking and terrifying. But it could be imagined. If it wasn't for the fact that the worlds and lands here all had their own mysteries and protective powers, just the tremors alone would have been enough to kill them. Perhaps it was already enough to destroy all these worlds. Fortunately, the disciples of the Golden Monk and the other sages were fast enough. Otherwise, if they were still here at this time, just this kind of impact alone would be enough to take away half of their lives. At that instant, the resonance between Luo Fan's palm and the realm source became even more intense. The mysteries of the true divine realm flowed within it as the resonance increased and the power it displayed increased as well. Following this process, it became stronger and stronger. However, he had just become a despaired. How could his ability to use the origin of the realm compare to Qiangua, who had been a despaired for billions of years, or even countless eras? Although the transformation of his palm was mysterious and unpredictable, the transformation of Thousand Kingdoms' sharp blade, but would only be deeper and more mysterious than him. Under such circumstances, the result of the battle between the two could easily tell what the trend was. Although the palm was constantly changing, countless seals, hand signs, and hundreds of millions of mysteries of the true divine realm were added to it. However, under the even more complicated and profound transformations of the sharp blade, it was shattered bit by bit and crushed bit by bit. Although the process of being crushed was extremely slow, the trend was incomparably firm, as if there was no way to reverse it. Seeing such changes, Luo Fan's heart didn't waver at all. On the contrary, he had entered a strange state during this process. He could faintly feel that the mysteries of the true Saint Grade and the origin source were like a flood that had broken through a dam, continuously pouring into his heart. Gradually, more and more marks were left in his heart, becoming more and more profound. These were none other than the true divine realm mysteries that were brought about by the resonance of the origin of the realm that he had released at that moment. It was a pity that although these true divine realm mysteries poured into his heart, they didn't leave a complete mark in it. It was as if tens of thousands of true divine realm mysteries had flowed through, and only one could leave a faint mark in his heart. The reason for this was also very simple. Although Luo Fan could already see the existence of the origin of the realm, he was still a false saint. The endless changes contained in the true divine realm were still too complicated for him. Even though he had already obtained the qualifications to comprehend it, he would still need to spend an extremely long time and a great amount of energy in order to truly comprehend it. Of course, It was impossible for him to retain the mysteries that had flowed through his heart so easily. However, even if it was just a tiny and blurry trace, it was already a huge improvement for him. Almost at every moment, he felt that his cultivation realm was increasing. And it turned out that after he became a false saint, he hadn't felt this for a long time. And this kind of improvement made his perception of the origin of the realm become clearer and clearer. He was also getting clearer and clearer about the true divine realm's mysteries. Faintly, he even felt that he was evolving toward a state where he could step into the origin of the realm with the help of Ho-Ho's senses. Under these various changes, the changes made by Luo Fan's palm became more and more repetitive and more profound. The mysteries of true life that were triggered from the source of his cultivation also became more and more numerous. I didn't expect him to enter the zone so quickly. It seems that after this calamity, we will have one more member. Looking at the changes in Luo Fan's body, Chi-E suddenly sighed. To these people in despair, although Luo Fan had already obtained the recognition, he could barely be considered as a person in despair. But because he had just stepped into this level, he was like a baby to them. Therefore, they did not really accept Luo Fan before. However, if Luo Fan's strength could be raised to a sufficient level, in the end, when they could take him seriously or even threaten them, they would naturally accept him and treat him as a companion that they could plot with, and fight together with. It's not that simple, Dao Shui said with a smile. We can have such strength. It's accumulated from a few calamities. No matter how much of a genius he is, it's impossible for him to catch up without the time of calamity. From the fact that many of the false saints under the sages had never heard of a calamity, it could be seen how long the time between the two calamities was. How long was the interval between them? It was possible to know. A calamity represented a terrifying amount of time. This Dao Shui actually said that Luo Fan needed a calamity to catch up to them. This was enough to show how powerful they were and how weak Luo Fan was in their eyes. That's not for sure, Chuang Wu said calmly. This person is very likely to be the main character of this calamity. Anything that happened to him, any miracle that happened, it would not be strange. Maybe in the next moment. What if he suddenly had an epiphany and his strength directly surpassed ours? That's just a possibility. At least his main character halo is still not obvious. Yao Sang sighed. Those with the main character halo must be the main character. But those without the main character halo might not be the main character. Who could be sure of this kind of thing? Huang Fei, the other despair, laughed at this moment. The few of them were chatting casually, but Qian Guo was unhappy. Are you guys watching a show here? This is indeed a good show, Dao Shui said very seriously. What does it matter? What's the point of time to us? Even this time, if we divide up those false saints, will we really achieve the effect we want? On this point, I think you guys are all very clear about this. So, it's better to take this opportunity to relax. Chi-E laughed. You guys don't think the chances are high. Why don't you give them all to me? Chinguis said disdainfully. That won't do. Although the chances aren't high. But it's still an opportunity, isn't it? What if I'm lucky and happen to seize that small opportunity? Chuang Wu laughed. We can't take chances. Qianguo could only say. What about you? Aren't you taking chances too? Chuang Wu laughed directly at Qianguo. Hearing this, Qianguo was silent. As Chuang Wu said, these people came here, in fact, holding a glimmer of hope. Moreover, this matter seemed to be very simple at this time and would be completed very smoothly. But these people were all existences who had experienced many world tribulations. They all knew clearly that things would not be so simple and would not end so smoothly. Every world tribulation, even for them, was a great challenge. No matter how simple and smooth something seemed, once it was placed in the calamity of the world, it would become complicated and confusing. Perhaps some changes that seemed extremely simple and ordinary would eventually evolve and expand to the point that the people in despair, would truly be dragged into the abyss of despair, never to be reincarnated. This kind of thing had happened too many times in the previous few world tribulations, which made each of them vigilant. It was also because of this vigilance that although these despair seemed to have attacked with all their strength, in fact, they only used a small part of their strength. More of their thoughts and more of their strength were actually on guard against other unknown changes, wanting to resist the possible accidents at any time. Therefore, at this time, their performance was not much different from that of Luo Fan. There was no absolute crushing advantage at all. Suddenly, Luo Fan shouted softly. Suddenly, another palm appeared beside the palm that he had sent out. This palm was also condensed by strength. It also contained the endless mysteries of the true divine and also resonated with the origin of the realm. After this palm appeared, it began to merge with the palm that had appeared here before. The two cooperated and constantly made all kinds of incredible hand seals and hand seals. Although there was only one more palm, the changes of the hand seals were already 100 times, 1,000 times more than the original. At this moment, the power of the hand seals that the two palms made suddenly skyrocketed, and in an instant, it actually suppressed Qianguo's sharp blade. In the blink of an eye, the crushing of the sharp blade was stopped. 2 hands? That's good too. Qianguo smiled. With a point of his hand, another ray of light rushed out of his boundless world, condensing into a shield in the void. This shield also surpassed time. Almost at the same time that it was formed, it had already arrived in front of Luo Fan's palm. Together with the sharp blade that he had released before, it fought with the two palms. The cooperation between the sharp blade and the shield was also endless. With the sudden addition of the shield, Qianguo's side's attack ability instantly gained the upper hand. Once again, Luo Fan's two palms were pressed back. However, at this moment, the two palms were pushed back and they were in a crumbling state. Compared to the beginning, it was more than 10 times slower. The two palms cooperated with each other. After all, compared to the combination of the shield and the sharp blade, the changes were more complicated, more mysterious, and the potential was also greater. Although Qianguo used the combination of the sharp blade and the shield to close the gap between the two sides, the gap was still a gap, and it was not so easy to eliminate. For such a change, the current Luo Fan was completely not concerned about it, because when he suddenly displayed the second palm just now, he already felt that he had broken through the barrier between the origin of the realm and himself. Although his entire body had yet to step into the realm of origin, he had already probed his head into it. Although the origin of the realm was illusory and did not even exist, but from the endless true divine mysteries contained in it, it could be seen that the origin of the realm itself was not simple. In fact, the origin of the realm was a kind of existence that surpassed heaven and earth beyond the Great Way. This kind of existence, it was not in any heaven and earth, not in any power, and not in any great way. It was connected with the state of chaos. In other words, it was actually a state of chaos from a certain point of view. This was actually very easy to understand. For any cultivator, once they became a sage-to-be, the state of chaos was already a mysterious veil to them. In other words, once a cultivator became a sage-to-be, they would also be able to sense the state of chaos. And everything inside heaven and earth, including the Great Way, was not a problem for cultivators who had reached the sage-to-be and above, except for some extremely special heaven and earth. Under such circumstances, in any heaven and earth, the existence that needed to surpass ordinary false saints to be able to see naturally could only be outside heaven and earth, in the state of chaos. Even if it was an existence like the origin of the realm, which was almost invisible. It was precisely because of this special characteristic of the origin of the realm that it was extremely difficult for Luo Fan to break through the barrier and enter it. At this moment, he was able to break through the barrier with his own comprehension and explore the origin of the realm. This obviously meant that he had already made great progress. After reaching his head into the origin of the realm, Luo Fan once again felt the great pressure that the origin of the realm brought him. In addition, when he looked at the gray mystery of the true saint around him, he had a clearer feeling than when he looked at it with Ho Hua's senses. In an instant, wisps of the mystery of the true saint naturally flowed into his heart and was naturally understood by him. The reason why Ho Hua's understanding of the origin of the realm was obviously deeper and more powerful than Luo Fan's. But Luo Fan's understanding of the origin of the realm with Ho Hua's senses was not as good as his own, was also very simple. It was borrowed, after all, it was borrowed. It was like borrowing an iron hammer and training one's body to be as hard as steel. The latter was obviously the real powerful one. With such a huge change, how could Luo Fan still have the mood to care about the battle with Qianghua? Of course, he allowed his palm to naturally evolve all kinds of power, to resonate with the origin of the realm, and to continuously add the mysteries of the true divinity of the origin of the realm to his body to fight against Qianghua. Just as Luo Fan was using the power he had just obtained to fight Qianghua, in this world, Han Guzi and the others were in a dilemma. The strength of Qianghua and the others was too oppressive for them. It was so oppressive that they almost felt despair. However, they knew very well that if they really wanted to deal with them, what awaited them would definitely be falling into their hands without any resistance. However, they had worked so hard for such a long time. After plotting for so long to obtain the false saint status, they did not agree. Even though it had been proven that using the mystery of the true saint in this world to prove one's Tao and become a true saint, it was impossible for them to turn the false into the real. However, at this moment, the power brought about by proving one's Tao and becoming a saint through the mystery of the true saint and the various principles of the true saint stage surged in their hearts. It also made them believe that the longer they could maintain this state, the more benefits they could obtain. In the end, they might even find the way to turn the false into the real. The way to become a true saint. They had such hope. How could they be willing to give up this false saint status just like that? How could they give up just like that when they heard Luo Fan say that the other party was powerful? What do you guys think? Han Guzi sighed and asked the other false saints. Hearing his words, the other two false saints shook their heads. It was unknown whether they did not know what to do or if they did not agree to give up the false saint status. I believe you guys have seen how powerful they are. Han Guzi did not make any movements, nor did he point to the sky. However, all the false saints present knew that he was talking about those who were in despair. Even with the help of heaven and earth, we won't be their match. If it weren't for fellow Taoist Luo Fan protecting us, we might have already fallen into the enemy's hands and our false saint status would have been forcefully taken away. However, you guys know this as well. It's impossible for fellow Taoist Luo Fan to keep helping us. Furthermore, Han Guzi did not continue, but everyone knew what he was going to say. Based on their previous understanding of Luo Fan would definitely not be a match for those in despair. Although they are powerful, however, the gap isn't so big that it can't be made up for. Perhaps we can think of some ways to make up for this gap, a false saint said. However, he deduced the strength of those in despair based on the bet that Qianghua and the others had made against heaven and earth to determine their respective shares. The gap isn't impossible to make up for. The expressions of the other false saints changed slightly. Obviously, they all had the same thoughts as this false saint. After all, they had already relied on their mystical ability, the long river, to last for such a long time. Although the gap was a little big, they were still at the same level. If they used some methods to close this gap, it did not seem impossible. At this moment, an inexplicable wave suddenly swept across this world, sweeping across the bodies of all the false saints present. Amidst this wave, all the false saints felt an indescribable fear. It was as if this wave was the gaze of some kind of natural enemy that was looking at them. An indescribable sense of danger suddenly surged up. At this moment, each of them felt as if their lives were about to be lost in the next moment. Their bodies seemed to be completely shattered in the next moment and eventually turned into nothingness. Upon discovering this, the bodies of Han Guzi and the others trembled. With a thought, they instantly discovered the source of this wave, outside the world. When they saw the source of the wave, clearly, all of them seemed to be dumbfounded. Everyone stood there in a daze, their eyes filled with disbelief. That was because they discovered that the aura of a true saint which was so dense that it had turned into a substance, was being emitted from a sharp blade and a shield. Compared to the aura of a true saint, the true saint aura that so many of them had used the true saint mystical ability to trigger when they had opened up this world was extremely insignificant. Compared to the two, it was like comparing an ant to the entire earth. The disparity was so great that it made one feel despair. The reason why the shield suddenly erupted with such an aura was very simple. It was because opposite the shield and the sharp blade, there were two huge palms forming a seal, and with a power that could destroy everything, they slammed towards the shield. It was this almost absolute collision that caused the shield and the sharp blade to be unable to restrain their auras. Finally, their true power was revealed, and the mysteries of the true saint that they contained were finally revealed. This was why such a dense aura was revealed. This was why this inexplicable wave was produced, causing Hunguzi and the others to wake up from their delusions. Chapter 1536. At this moment, Hunguzi and the rest truly understood how huge the gap between them and those in despair was. This gap made them finally lose all hope of getting lucky. They understood that if they were to face them, they would only die. Although false saints had firm wills and could even be considered stubborn, they were not simple-minded existences after all. If there was a slim chance, they would use all their efforts to fight and risk their lives. However, if there wasn't even a 1 in a billion chance of success, they wouldn't insist on seeking death. Before this, they felt that they still had a slim chance of success when facing those in despair, so they still had the thought of giving it a try. But at this moment, everything that had happened in the outside world had shattered the slightest possibility for them, allowing them to finally understand the truth. Looks like we can only give up. Another false saint sighed. Give up. However, what else can we do if we give up? Another false saint said. To these false saints who were disciples of the sages, constructing this world and relying on the mysteries of the true saints in this world to prove their Tao and become sages was already their last attempt to turn the false into the real. If they gave up on this, what awaited them would obviously be endless despair. Hearing this, all the false saints present could not help but fall silent. They were different from Luo Fan. Every single one of them had become false saints for countless trillions of years. Everything about the false saint stage, they had already completely enjoyed and experienced it. Now, they wanted to obtain even the slightest bit of progress. They needed to spend countless years accumulating and enduring to be able to achieve it. It was also only at this moment in this world that they could feel the long-awaited feeling of their cultivation realm rapidly increasing, using the true saint mysteries as proof to become a false saint. It was also at this moment that they could barely see a trace of light in the originally dark and bright future of turning fake into reality. If they gave up on this and returned to that time, they could only rely on endless time to endure it. They were unwilling to live a life of hopeless fumbling in the boundless darkness. Thinking of the future, an inexplicable madness suddenly appeared in the depths of Hunguzi and the rest's eyes. I feel that it's fine if we die, a false saint said in a somewhat hoarse voice. This kind of hoarseness, of course, was not his original voice, but because of the conflict in his heart, it affected his body and naturally caused his voice to become like this. Hearing this, the other false sages trembled. They looked at each other and saw an indescribable madness and determination in each other's eyes. It seems like compromising isn't in our character. Hunguzi sighed in the end. He had already made up his mind. After going through such a conflict, they had already made up their minds. Even if they were stubborn, they had to keep going. Even if he died, even if they were destroyed like this, they would not give up on their current false saint status. After making such a decision, they naturally didn't continue to wait here, taking advantage of this opportunity to quickly increase his cultivation level. They each began to use their identities as false saints born from the world to adjust the flow of time in this world with their own strength. Soon, the time in the world had accelerated to an unimaginable speed. A single breath in the outside world was equivalent to billions of years in this world. Moreover, after reaching this step, they still didn't stop. They continued to accelerate the flow of time, still trying their best to make this gap bigger and bigger. This kind of situation was almost impossible in other worlds. In other worlds, even if it was a world that could give birth to false saints, there was a limit to the speed at which they could withstand the flow of time. There is also a limit to the limit of the speed at which they could accelerate the flow of time. Even with many false saints controlling and accelerating, they could only reach this level at most. The reason why this world could still continue to accelerate and improve after reaching this step was very simple. It was because this world was already fundamentally different from other worlds. In this part of the world, there were already true saint-level mysteries being born. Although there weren't many of these true saint-level mysteries, to this world, it had already improved the quality of this world. It caused the ability of this world to withstand the acceleration of the flow of time to increase by hundreds of millions of times, almost reaching an almost infinite level, accelerating the flow of time. At this moment, Luo Fan, who had focused his attention on the origin of the realm, sensed all of this. In an instant, he already knew the decision of Hungu Zi and the others, and he couldn't help but sigh inwardly. They've actually decided to rather die than submit. It's up to you. He sighed and no longer cared about them. At this moment, the acceleration of the flow of time did not have much of an effect on him. After all, his mind was currently placed within the quintessence of his cultivation realm, and the flow of time here was independent of the heavens and the earth, and it existed independently of the world. No matter how fast the flow of time around his body accelerated or slowed down, the flow of time here would not change at all. It would not change at all. Therefore, at this moment, even if billions of years in this world were equivalent to a breath of time in the outside world, it did not affect him much. Looks like they really haven't given up. At this moment, Qian Gua smiled at the other people in despair. Isn't that for sure? Isn't their mentality the same as ours in the past? If we encountered them in the past, would we have given up? Dao Shui said with a smile. They had completely grasped the mentality of Hungu Zi and the others. That was why they could calmly confront Luo Fan. They were not worried that Hungu Zi and the others would give up on the false saint godhood. They were not worried that Hungu Zi and the others would give up on the false saint godhood. From the looks of it, they clearly knew why Hungu Zi and the others had accelerated the flow of time. However, they weren't worried that Hungu Zi and the others would improve their cultivation to a level that could threaten them after such a long period of time. Accelerating the flow of time might be able to greatly improve one's cultivation realm. However, to truly improve to their level and become the current despair ones, it was not something that could be achieved by accelerating the flow of time. At this moment, Qiangua's sharp blade and shield were still clashing with Luo Fan's two palms. The layers of intense treasure light that came from it continued to spread throughout the universe. All of these vibrations caused the infinite space-time and the infinite worlds to tremble. At this moment, they all felt the terror of the tremors. Although Luo Fan's palms had more variations than the combination of the sharp blade and the shield, the true sage mysteries contained in his palms were still far from the combination of the sharp blade and the shield. Therefore, in this kind of battle, the two palms gradually fell into a disadvantageous position. The power of the shield and the sharp blade continued to shatter the two palms and continued to destroy them. If this continued, the destruction of the two palms was almost inevitable, even though time was slow. However, Luo Fan didn't care about this at all. Qianguo did not seem to be in a hurry. He appeared to be very interested and very calm. Looking at his appearance, it was clearly he did not use his full strength. As for the other despairing people, they just watched from the side. None of them made a move. You guys are very noisy. At this moment, a voice came into the ears of all the despairing people present. It was a woman's voice. However, the voice contained boundless majesty. It had a shocking effect of crushing and overpowering everything. Hearing this voice, even Luo Fan instantly recovered from the state of breaking into the origin of the realm. Qianguo and the others instantly looked solemn. Jean, Emperor, Ho was said with a frown. Of course it's me. The woman's voice was heard again. There was an inexplicable anger in the voice. It was like a person who was suddenly awakened from a deep sleep. The resentment in the voice was so strong that it turned into a substance. Suddenly, a figure appeared out of thin air in the void. She was a peerlessly beautiful woman, but there was a faintly discernible majesty lingering around her, making her look like a supreme emperor. After the woman appeared, her eyes suddenly lit up and she said, "It turns out that another world calamity has arrived. It seems that I woke up at the right time." "Jean Emperor, are you also interested in them?" Qianguo frowned and asked. "Of course I'm interested," the woman replied with a smile. "This person is stronger than Qianguo and the others." At this moment, Luo Fan had already made a judgment. This woman had only appeared here alone and did not bring along her world. However, the feeling that her entire body gave him was that she was stronger than Qianguo and the others, as well as their worlds. Facing Qianguo and the others, he still had the confidence to fight against them. He was confident that even if he failed, he could absolutely remain unscathed. However, facing this woman, who was the so-called Jean Emperor, he felt that he had no confidence that he could escape at all. This kind of strength made him extremely vigilant. In this universe, there is actually such a strong person. This was the only thought in his mind at this time. When he was in the demon realm, level 9 false saints and supreme venerables were already so powerful that he could not resist them. When he left the demon realm and entered the myriad realms, these people were like ants to him. However, the false saints had already replaced their positions and became undefeatable. After that, when he became a false saint himself and mastered the true divine ability, the false saints became ants again, existences that he could crush at will. However, at this time, another despair person appeared and replaced the original false saint's position. Now, he had stepped into the despair person level and was barely able to have the power to protect himself in front of the despair person. However, the sudden appearance of the Jean Emperor in front of him had smashed his confidence into pieces. There was simply no end to it. It was endless, and it suddenly made him feel a sense of exhaustion. Why is it so difficult to become a true divine? Since the Jean Emperor is interested, I'll withdraw. Then, I'll quit, Qianguo said directly. As he said that, he simply waved his hand in the void. In an instant, the sharp blade and shield that he had sent out shook instantly and disappeared without a trace. He had easily escaped from the battle with the 2 palms that Luo Fan had sent out. This kind of control over the god's ability showed how casual he was in the battle with Luo Fan previously. Since Qianguo had given up, Luo Fan naturally could not be relentless with him. At this moment, he had an idea. He also dispersed the 2 palms. Although the power of these 2 palms was many times stronger than the true divine ability, for the current Luo Fan, it was just a matter of a thought to condense such palms. Whenever he wanted, how much he wanted, he could obtain them instantly. Under such circumstances, there was naturally no need to keep these 2 palms. It would be a waste of his energy and time. The other desperation men also said at this moment, "I also give up." In the blink of an eye, the 6 desperation men had completely given up. However, this did not make Luo Fan happy at all. Instead, he raised his vigilance to the highest level. Although it was a good thing for them to give up, it also meant that the existence that would participate in the next battle would make them extremely afraid, so they had to give up. This, for Luo Fan, it was equivalent to driving away the wolf and entering the tiger. How could he be happy? "Are you going to leave like this?" the Jean Emperor suddenly said with a smile. His words made the expressions of all the desperation men change slightly. In Luo Fan's senses, there were even inexplicable fluctuations coming from the places where many of the despair warriors who hadn't come here were. It seemed that the Jean Emperor's words had shaken them, and they could not control themselves. "What's your plan, Jean Emperor?" Dao Shui frowned at this moment. "Although I'm very interested in this world, but what I am more interested in is your world," the Jean Emperor said with a smile. "Our world." Hearing this, Qianguo and the others' expressions became extremely ugly. At this moment, all of them finally understood why they had always felt that this world-ending tribulation would not end so easily and that they would not achieve their goal so easily. It turned out that they had also become a part of this world-ending tribulation. Moreover, it was not the kind of transcendental participation to seize the results of the world-ending tribulation, but to be seized as prey. Yes, I found that your world has been condensed very well. The occult of true saint in it meets my requirements, so I plan to extract the occult of true saint from your world to supplement my world. What do you think? The Gene Emperor said with a smile. Although her face was full of smiles and she looked lovely, at this moment, no one thought that she was beautiful or cute. Everyone just looked at her with vigilance. You can't blame me. Who told you to become a part of this world-ending tribulation? If you didn't participate in this world-ending tribulation, you wouldn't have touched any laws, and I wouldn't have attacked you for no reason, the Gene Emperor said with a smile. As she spoke, she raised her hand and grabbed towards Ho-Ho's colossal world. Ho-Ho's expression changed, and he said, I didn't participate in this world-ending tribulation. Why not? The world-ending tribulation on you is stronger than everyone else's, the Gene Emperor said indifferently. Hearing this, Ho-Ho thought of how he had led Luo Fan to become a desperate person, and he suddenly felt a surge of regret. Helping the protagonist of the world-ending tribulation, this was actually the same as Qiangua and the others participating in this world-ending tribulation. However, compared to Qiangua and the others, he was just standing on the other side, opposite to Qiangua and the others. The circulation of karma, the transformation of luck, it's really mysterious and abstruse. At this moment, Ho-Ho could only sigh with emotion. Just like that, Ho-Ho had already started to take action. Although panic was extremely powerful, it didn't mean that he would give up resisting. At this moment, the colossal world where Ho-Ho was located fluctuated rapidly, and a large number of true divine mysteries contained in the great Tao of the colossal world were instantly boiling. All kinds of mysterious combinations appeared in these true divine mysteries. In this combination, countless rays of light that contained the mysteries of the true sage gushed out from the sky. They were constantly evolving and changing in the void. In the blink of an eye, a boundless world was formed. It directly rushed towards the Gene Emperor. This world was extremely mysterious. Everything in it, even the tiniest speck of dust, was composed of true, divine, supernatural powers. These endless true, divine, supernatural powers didn't exist independently, but were combined together in an extremely mysterious and profound way, complementing each other's power. When two true, divine, supernatural powers were combined, their power would be hundreds or even thousands of times stronger than before. With the addition of another true, divine, supernatural power, it would be hundreds or even thousands of times stronger than before. With the addition of another true, divine, supernatural power, it would be hundreds or even thousands of times stronger than before, and so on and so forth. When these countless true, divine, supernatural powers were combined together, it wouldn't be difficult for them to destroy the entire world and the entire earth. Such a world formed by the true, divine, supernatural powers rushed towards the Gene Emperor at an extremely fast speed. In the blink of an eye, it had already swallowed the power of the Gene Emperor's grasp. At this moment, an incredible impact broke out. At this moment, the world seemed to be filled with sand that was constantly shaking in a sealed bottle. It began to shake crazily. Compared to this kind of shaking strength, the shaking caused by the clash between Qiangua and Luo Fan's power was simply like being fixed by the most solid object. The difference between the two was like the difference between heaven and earth. Just now, Qiangua really used too much strength. At this moment, Luo Fan let out a sigh. He could already feel the power of the world formed by the combination of countless true, divine, supernatural powers just from the shaking. Ho-Hua's strength was not much weaker than Qiangua's. What Ho-Hua could do, Qiangua could also do the same. Just now, Qiangua didn't say that he used a similar method. Even if he used 1% of his power, the two palms that he sent out before would not have any resistance. They would definitely be completely shattered in an instant. Realizing this, Luo Fan couldn't help but smile bitterly. I thought that I was already at the same level as the veteran Desperators, but now it seems that I was too arrogant. Luo Fan sighed. However, thinking about it at this time, it was also reasonable. Although he was now considered a Desperator, he could barely be considered to have stepped into the level of Qiangua and the others. However, not to mention the huge gap in the understanding of the origin of the realm, Qiangua and the others had the vast thousand world that they had condensed for countless years, while Luo Fan himself was alone. If there wasn't such a gap, it would be unreasonable. However, if I also condensed the world that I created, I might be able to catch up with him soon. Such a thought suddenly flashed through Luo Fan's mind. Just as Luo Fan was thinking about it, the other Desperators, besides Hohua, had already made their moves. This time was different from when they attacked the world. Previously, when they attacked the world, it was equivalent to an adult attacking a child. Naturally, they would do whatever they wanted. But now, they were fighting for their own lives. They were fighting for the results of their countless years of hard work. How could they still stick to the principle of one-on-one like before? Naturally, they wanted to defeat the Gene Emperor by hook or by crook. This time, when they attacked, the momentum was also grand and vast. However, their attacks were not the same. Not all of them used true divine prowess to envelop the world to crush the opponent. Instead, some relied on the endless true divine prowess to build some kind of magic weapon, some built figures, and some built parts of the body. All were different. However, no matter what form they built, or what form they used to carry the countless true divine prowess, the power of the means they displayed must be so powerful that it shocked Luo Fan. They must have reached the point where they could easily destroy the entire world, and even the Earth and the universe. The appearance of these images caused the entire universe to tremble even more intensely.